Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 5:30 and a quorum of members is present. So this work session of the Board of Education of the School District of New Berlin is called to order. Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby. Here. Mr. Helmer.
Here.
Ms. Connick.
Here.
Mr. Kurth. Ms. Scholes.
Here.
Mr. Seidel.
Here.
Ms. Wondercheck.
In recognition of the serious and important nature of our efforts here, we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. For all those who are able, please rise. And now for those who wish to prepare for the meeting, we will have a moment of silence. This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday by providing the agenda to the City Library. The agenda was also posted on the district website. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Journal-Sentinel, the Waukesha Freeman, and the Waukesha Now, all of which have filed requests for all public notices. This evening we have a work session, a refresher on Robert's Rules and Open Meetings Law, good boardmanship, and we have with us this evening our attorneys who will be conducting this work session for us. Yep, go ahead. We can start.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Andy Phillips, and my partner Chrissy Hamill and I are with Atolis Law. It's a new firm as of January 24 this year, and so we're excited to talk to you about a whole variety of topics. And in putting together the PowerPoint, I think there are over 90 slides, Diana. Yeah, I'm not getting through all of them tonight, and that's okay. I overshared with the slides because there's good information in those slides. And so I'm going to hit the high points and talk about these various topics. If you have questions and want to dig into any sort of detail, feel free to let me know. A couple of things I want to point out is, number one, I have never in my life sat in your seats. I've never been a member of a board of education. So I don't know what it's like to sit behind that table and have to deal with what you all have to deal with. And I know that there are challenges, but my job is to give advice. My job isn't to sit in that seat. So if you find yourself sitting there saying, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's never sat in my seat, you're right, I've not. So please feel free to speak up as we go through these points and have this discussion. The second thing that I want to point out is that I know none of you are doing this for the money. I've seen your paychecks. You're not doing this for the money. You're doing it for the love of the kids and the love of this community. And so I think that if we keep that in mind and know that our hearts are in the right places, that we'll be able to get through a lot of these challenges. So without further ado, maybe we'll start with the presentation. We're going to cover, like I said, a lot of topics tonight. We're going to talk about running effective meetings. We're going to talk about basics in parliamentary procedure. What are the different types of motions? What is boardsmanship and what are the rules of decorum that apply here? What are some motions and misconceptions under Robert's Rules? How do we deal with public comment issues and concerns? And then we're going to briefly have an overview of the open meetings law. So when we talk about running effective meetings, I want to set the stage here because this is another common misconception. I'm going to talk to you about Robert's Rules of Order, but Robert's Rules of Order do not have the force of law. When we look at the hierarchy of what applies to a certain circumstance, we always have to start with state law applying first. In the absence of a state law that's applicable, do we have a board rule or a policy, a board policy that dictates how we deal with a particular situation? In the absence of those two things, then we revert to Robert's Rules. I know in your board policies you've adopted Robert's Rules of Order newly revised. Does anybody know when it was newly revised? I think it was the 1940s. The 12th edition of the newly revised version came out just last year. So hopefully you've got the 12th edition. That's the edition that would apply to your meetings. But we've got a hierarchy of rules that apply here. A great example of how the hierarchy applies is with the open meetings law. And so, for example, if somebody wants to bring a motion to reconsider something that was adopted at the previous meeting, can you simply do it without it being on the agenda? Robert's Rule says you can, but according to the open meetings law, you can't. Okay, you need previous notice to the public of what you're going to consider at a meeting. And so, again, it's important to understand this hierarchy as we go through this presentation. It's also important to understand, why do the rules of order exist? Why did this guy named Henry Robert come up with these rules of order? And does anybody know the story why Henry Robert came up with these rules of order? He was in his church meeting and it was chaos. It was absolute chaos. And so he found himself actually in Milwaukee. He was in Milwaukee when he wrote this. It was the middle of January. So you can imagine that there wasn't a lot to do in the middle of January in Milwaukee. So he thought, I'm going to write down some of these rules of order that I've thought of. And so over the years, we've seen the iterations of Robert's Rules of Order come out, and it's really a compilation of English parliamentary law. And so what the purpose of the rules of order are to facilitate the smooth functioning of the assembly. It provides a basis for resolving questions of procedure so that we don't get hung up on how things get done, but we get back to the business of what needs to be done. And when we think about the rules of order, there is a recognition that the majority rules, all right? Everywhere in Robert's order, it's a majority vote in order to carry the day. Sometimes a supermajority is required, and the reason a supermajority is required is because Roberts also recognizes that the minority has certain rights that you cannot take away without some extraordinary action, such as a supermajority vote. The rules respect the rights of individual members and even absentees. And so we've got recognition of this entire basket of rights that apply to all of the various factions within a deliberative assembly that apply with Robert's Rules of Order. So let's start with how we get business before the body. And this is very basic stuff, but I want to go through this, and I'm going to skip through the slides that explain all of these things. But I want to go through this so that we understand how the rules of order work as it relates to getting business before this body, the Board of Education. A member has to obtain the floor. You can do that through recognition by the chair. You can't just blurt things out. There are a couple exceptions to that. I'll get into that in a moment. But the chair has to recognize you. So you obtain the floor by the chair recognizing you. You state your motion. At that point, it belongs to you. It's your motion. That motion needs a second. The second is merely a show of support for debate. It doesn't mean that the seconder supports what the motion says. It says this is worthy of debate on the floor. That's what the second does. Once a motion is made and seconded, it is up to the chair to restate the motion. Why is that process so critical? Because things happen, I know and you all know, things happen sometimes fast and furious. I move that we buy a red car. Second, let's go to vote. That's not how this gets done. The motion is made, it's seconded, the chair restates. That's the opportunity for the chair to ensure that the motion is properly before the body in the form that the maker of the motion wants and the seconder of the motion intended, okay? So again, that's a very important step. Motion made second, then chair restates the motion. Once the chair restates the motion, that motion belongs to the body. It is no longer the maker's motion. And so at times, I've been in meetings where somebody's made a motion, it's been seconded, chair restates, it's before the body for debate, and the maker of the motion says, with permission, I'd like to withdraw this motion. Seconder says, permission granted. And then everybody says, well, the motion's withdrawn. It's not withdrawn. The maker doesn't own that motion. The body owns that motion. Now, by majority vote, the body can allow the maker to withdraw that motion, but the body has to dispose of that motion, not the maker. In an effort to speed things along, what can happen is the maker of the motion can say, Madam President, I wish to withdraw that motion. Madam President can say, is there any objection to withdrawal of this motion? Hearing none, motion is withdrawn. That's a way to speed it up, but again, it's asking the body for permission to withdraw that motion. So we get into the debate, and we discuss this motion, and there are particular rules that relate to how the debate proceeds. Once the debate is finished, it's put to a vote, the members vote, and then the results are announced. Not only is the result announced, I think it's good practice that when the outcome of the vote is determined, motion passes, that we say what the motion did, what it does. Motion passes as a result, this is going to happen. Again, why are we doing that? It's so that everybody understands exactly what the official action of this board is as a result of the vote that was taken. And at that point, if anybody wants to raise an objection as to how your chair, Madam President, decides what the official action is, you can raise that objection. So again, I like full disclosure and transparency as it relates to this entire process so that there's no confusion all along the way. So again, there are various ways to obtain the floor. You make a motion. We'll talk about the concept of an original main motion and what that means in a moment. This is an important slide too, because when we make a motion, I've heard too in meetings where somebody will say something even before something is on the floor, and somebody says, "I so move." What was moved? We don't exactly know what it is. So I would get into practice of having anybody who wants to make a motion of actually stating the motion. Now, is it illegal to say "I so move" second and have it before the body? No, that's not illegal. But again, in an effort to create transparency and reduce confusion, I think it's best practice to have the maker of the motion suggest to the body and the chair of the meeting, the president of the school board, exactly what needs to be done. Motion is seconded. Chair restates the motion. The members debate, and there are certain rules in Robert's rules that go along with the debate process. All of these rules can be modified by the body or within your board policies. And remember, board policies take precedence over Robert's rules. And so you can have certain rules that relate to debate, but as a default in Robert's rules, typically the maker of the motion is the one who speaks first. No member can speak more than twice on any original main motion. Somebody can't speak twice on original main motion until everybody has been given the opportunity to speak at least once on that motion. You can speak for no more than 10 minutes at a time, and there's no concept in Robert's rules of yielding unused time to another member of the school board. That's something that happens in Congress. It doesn't happen here. They have their own special rules. We don't have those special rules in Robert's rules, all right? The other rule as it relates to debate is that you can't simply stand up and filibuster. In Congress, that happens all the time. Robert's rules doesn't recognize the concept of filibuster. In fact, that's considered to be dilatory, and the chair of a meeting that's operating under Robert's rules has the opportunity to call that person out of order. So again, just because we see it on C-SPAN doesn't mean that it necessarily applies here, nor is it anywhere in Robert's rules. Speaking to the motion, the remarks must be germane. In other words, we want to create an environment and a culture where we are speaking to the business before the body as opposed to the motivations or the personal characteristics of the maker of the motion or somebody who supported or is in opposition to the motion. So make the comments germane to the motion. Why do I say that and make that point? Because it's the president who has the opportunity to call somebody out of order for making comments that don't relate to the motion or the business before the school board. We debate. Amendments are in order. Only 2 amendments at a time. We'll get to the concept of amendments to a main motion in a moment. But again, the comments must be germane to the question that's before the body. And then it's put to a vote. And this is later on in the presentation, but I hear all the time too where there is a committee or a board that is debating a particular question. Then from the back of the room we hear, "I call the question." And I've seen it where people have said, "Oh, that means that we stop debate and we immediately go to a vote. And if 2/3 of the body decide that this ought to be put to a vote, then we have to stop debate." That's not true. That's not the case. I think that especially on matters impacting this board, that it is incumbent upon you to allow all those on the board wishing to speak to a motion to allow them to speak. And so it would be appropriate for your president to call a motion, and it's called move the previous question. You're not going to find call the question in Robert's rules. It's move the previous question. That would be out of order as long as there's somebody who wants to speak on that motion, okay? But let's say everybody's had the opportunity to speak. We want to cut off debate in a formal manner. I move the previous question. If that's seconded, then 2/3 vote of this body is necessary to go to an immediate vote on the question that's before the body. When we're talking about the vote process too, remember I said that in the vast majority of cases, it's majority vote rules. Well, there are circumstances where a supermajority vote is required. And so when we get to the vote, I think it's important for the chair of the meeting, in this case the president, to say, before this body is a motion to purchase a red car. A yes vote means we purchase the red car. A no vote means we don't purchase the red car. A simple majority is required for passage. Any questions before we proceed to vote? Hearing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of purchasing the red car say aye. All those against purchasing the red car say no, and then announce the result. A vote can happen in a variety of ways, and there's opportunity for the members of the board to request a showing of hands, for example, if there's a question on the outcome of a voice vote. Again, the presiding officer announces the results of the votes. So then we get into types of motions. And this is where we get into some of the weeds on Robert's rules and the rules of procedure. This, at the very bottom, you can see that I provided a hyperlink to the particular website where I pulled this information from because I thought it was just so good in the way that it broke down Robert's rules and categorized different things. Go take a look at that if you want to dive into this further. The reason I put this here is that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the variety of motions that are out there in Robert's rules and what they actually do. And so breaking them down into these categories of motions and thinking about what is the purpose of this motion assists people in understanding Robert's rules of order. We have main motions, an original main motion. Those are not covered anywhere in Robert's rules because it's a variety of topics that can be brought before this body in order for this body to take action. And so all of the things that are not covered in Robert's rules are called original main motions. I want to purchase a red car. That's an original main motion. Underneath the main motions, we have subsidiary motions. And those assist the body, in this case the board, in handling a different type of motion. A motion to amend the original main motion. Instead of a red car, I think it should be a blue car. That's a motion to amend the original main motion. The motion to amend is considered a subsidiary motion. A privilege motion means we got to deal with something right now, and we can't wait until we dispose of the current motion before the body. So I'm going to raise a privilege motion so that we can take care of this privileged issue before we get back to the original main motion before the body. An incidental motion is a motion that allows you to consider something that would be considered out of bounds otherwise. A motion to suspend your rules or suspend your policies would be an incidental motion. And then we have restorative motions that bring business that's already been disposed of back before this body for consideration. For example, a motion to reconsider a vote previously taken is a restorative motion. Subsidiary motions. I've talked about original main motions. The motion to amend, we've talked about that. This is an important one, though, in the first one, motion to postpone indefinitely. A motion to postpone indefinitely says we're going to take care of this item of business before the body permanently, okay? We're not going to bring it up again. And some of you may say, well, then why don't we just vote down the motion? Well, there may be circumstances where I don't necessarily want to vote no on that motion, but I don't want the body to consider it. And a lot of the people on this board might agree with my particular position in that regard. So I'll make a motion to postpone indefinitely to kill this without having to vote no on the particular issue that's before this body. So that's an important motion because it's a way that you can dispose of business without actually taking an up or down vote on the business before the body. Yes? How do you bring that back? See, that's the settled rule, and the settled rule says you can't bring it back during the current session of the board. And that's where we run into a little bit of difficulty as it relates to Robert's rules versus actual practice with the Board of Education. What is a Board of Education session? What is defined as a session of the Board of Education? See, that's the point. And so we talk about this. What is a session of a Board of Education in Wisconsin? What's it defined as in Wisconsin statutes? It's not defined. It's not. And so you run into problems on the question of how do you bring it back? And is it in order then if I wait 6 months? Is it in order if I wait a year? Because after a year, we're going to have new members on the board. So is a session a year-by-year thing? We have a term of office for officers on the board of 3 years. Do I have to wait 3 years to bring it back before this body? So that may be something that you want to consider, and I'm not saying you have to, but you may want to consider putting that in board policy to define when it is, if something's been postponed indefinitely, it can come back to this board. Because at some point, it's no longer postponed indefinitely because it was so long ago. If you decided something in 1983, why in the world can I not bring it back before this body in 2022? That makes no sense. That's a different motion. That's a motion to postpone for a time certain. All right? So in that circumstance, you're absolutely right. I don't want to talk about this right now. I want to see further study. I want to see what happens in a particular court case. I want to see what happens with the legislature. So I'm going to move to postpone this until our December scheduled board meeting. That's postponement to a time certain, and that's absolutely something you can do. It should be, yes. It should be. If the motion says I want it on the regular board agenda for the December board meeting, it should appear on the agenda automatically, if the motion passes.
Excuse me?
Yes, sorry.
Can I just request, since we're recording this, can you guys please turn on your mics when you have a question? No, that's great. Thank you.
Motion to commit or refer, that's used when you want extra time to take a look at a particular issue, whether it be at the committee level or for that matter at the administrative level. There may be certain items of business that come before this body that you want your superintendent and administrative staff to take a look at further. You can always make a motion to refer the matter to administrative staff and postpone consideration of the motion until administrative staff reports back, and I would put a time limit on it, say no later than the December board meeting, and then we will take it up again, okay? So that's another opportunity. Move the previous question, that's used to end debate. We've talked about that briefly. Postpone to a time certain, postpone definitely. We can limit or extend the limits of debate on a particular issue. A motion to lay on the table. I see this misused all the time, both government, nonprofit organizations, other organizations, is that if something is in need of postponement, I often hear people say, I move to table the motion, second, and they go to a vote. That's not what motion to lay on the table means. To lay something on the table means just like what it sounds. You're taking it from here and you're putting it over here. Why are you putting it over here? Because you have another urgent item of business that you need to take up right now. And then as soon as that urgent item of business is done, you're going to take it off the table over here and put it back here in the same meeting. It is never used to move to a different meeting or postpone to refer to a committee or refer to administration. That's the motion to postpone to a time certain or a definite postponement. So don't confuse the two. In my estimation, the motion to lay on the table is one of the most misused motions that I've seen. But again, you might say, well, what does it matter? We all know what it means. Well, for somebody like me looking at your minutes, if I see a motion to lay on the table, I say, oh, okay, I'm going to look further in the minutes and see when they brought it back. Well, they didn't bring it back. What in the world were they doing with that? If I see motion to postpone until the December board meeting, I know exactly what happened. I know that issue is coming back to this board in December. So again, some of the terminology you might say, well, we all know how it is, but the reason that we do things in an effort, again, transparency and make sure everybody understands what's happening, not only you, but the public, then let's use the right terminology. I think that's important. Then we get to privileged motions, and this is what I think is incredibly important for people who are not well-versed in parliamentary procedure. And I am by no means an expert on parliamentary procedure. I happened to take a 3-credit class in college because it looked cool, and it was fun. And then I found myself practicing with school districts, counties, and governmental organizations, and I actually got to use my college education. It was kind of fun. But there are a lot of people out there who are incredibly well-versed in parliamentary procedure, and there are many, many more people who are not, all right? The privilege motions are used by the people who are not to make sure they have a voice. Remember, one of the purposes of Robert's Rules is to give a voice to everybody, not just the people who know parliamentary procedure. And so when we have somebody saying, I call for the orders of the day, that means that your chair, the school board president, has deviated from the agenda and we got to get back on track. That's an opportunity for a member of the board to bring the president back into focus. We'll raise a question of privilege, whether it relates to the particular rules that you're considering in board policy or whatever it might be. Raise a question of privilege. You get to ask your chair, the board president, for her input on a particular topic, on how you're dealing with things procedurally. Ask for a recess. If you have to use the restroom, raise your hand and ask for a recess for 5 minutes so that you don't have to miss something. You can ask to adjourn. It's a proposal to end the meeting. Requires a majority vote. It's not debatable unless your board policies say it's debatable. And so that's a very powerful, powerful tool right there. Fix the time at which to adjourn. If you decide, I don't want to listen to this Phillips guy go on and on, so I'm going to fix the time to adjourn at 6 o'clock, I got to stop. Well, you guys get to leave at 6. I might have to keep talking. But you get to fix the time at which you're going to adjourn. And then we have these incidental motions, which again are as important as the privilege motions as it relates to the power of one person to ensure that they understand what is going on procedurally. Point of order, when there's been a breach of Robert's Rules of Order or a breach of your board policies, you want to raise the point of order to make sure that, again, this body doesn't do anything contrary to either of those. Appeal the rule of the chair. That's a very important one as well. If your board president makes a determination, let's say that you take a vote, and it was clear that the noes prevailed, yet the president says, the ayes have it, we're going to purchase a red car. I appeal the ruling of the chair, and then the body gets to determine, was the chair correct? It's up to all of you to vote to decide whether the chair was correct in that particular ruling. Motion to suspend the rules, we're not going to talk about that much because your board policies and suspending them, I would have a real issue from a legal standpoint in suspending your rules, but in a normal circumstance, if you've got some other organization that has rules of procedure, you can move to suspend the rules. Objection to the consideration of a question. Remember how I said the motion to postpone indefinitely gets rid of something without having an up or down vote? You can object to the consideration of a question before it ever comes before the body. If you have a motion that's made, somebody can object to the consideration of that motion flat out. And if a supermajority, 2/3, agrees with that motion, you're not even going to consider it. Division of a question, if you have a multi-part question, I move we purchase a red car, and I move that we also purchase a whole new set of basketballs. That's one motion. You can move to divide that question into the two motions, the red car and the basketballs. Distracted me here. You can move to consider something by paragraph or seriatim, and that also is dividing a particular question into a smaller, more digestible set of questions that the body can vote on. Call for a division of the assembly. It's used to question a voice vote. A single member can demand a show of hands. Motions related to the method of voting and the polling that occurs. Motions related to nominations. Request to be excused from a duty. Parliamentary inquiry. This is one that I think is a really good one for anybody who's a novice in parliamentary procedure to know. You can always ask a question of the board president as to how, under parliamentary rules, we are going to handle a particular matter coming before this body. And you do that vis-a-vis a parliamentary inquiry. And then it is up to the board president to make a determination as to how procedurally you're going to handle something and then tell you exactly how that's going to roll out. Point of information or request for information, another opportunity to get additional information. Request for permission to withdraw or modify a motion. This gets back to my earlier discussion about who owns what motion. Remember, as the maker of the motion, once it belongs to the body, you don't have special powers to withdraw it. It belongs to the body. You have to ask for permission to withdraw that motion, which the body can provide you. Request to read papers. Remember I said during debate that there's no concept of filibuster or reading from reports during debate? Well, you can ask for permission to read from a report or read papers. A request for other privilege. And I like that because if anything is not covered in the previous 14 that we just discussed, you have the opportunity to request some other privilege. And then we have this concept of restorative motions. Again, these get business back before the body that had previously been disposed of. There are some that I think are helpful, but the problem I've got with restorative motions, and where you've got to be careful with these, is that the open meetings law contradicts what Robert's Rules allows. So for example, where it says here that a motion to rescind an action previously taken requires a majority vote with previous notice or a 2/3 vote without previous notice. There is no concept of no previous notice. You have to have previous notice because you have to have published your agenda at least 24 hours in advance of your meeting. All right? So again, be very careful when we're dealing with Robert's Rules as it relates to how we deal with a motion to rescind or amend something previously adopted or reconsider, because Robert's Rules is going to allow you to do something that the open meetings law does not allow you to do. Reconsider, take something off the table, discharge a committee. And that's, in a nutshell, a very condensed nutshell, all of the various motions and orders that exist under Robert's rules. Before I move on and talk about boardsmanship and rules of decorum and debate, any questions or anything you wanted to discuss about any of that? I ran through an awful lot, and again, you'll have an opportunity to take a look at the slides, but any questions?
Andy, I just had one question about the notice provision for agendas. You know, there's stipulations in the statutes that where certain days are specified, that it doesn't include weekends and things like that. So the 24-hour rule about agendas for boards, does that mean when we meet on Monday at 5:30 that our agenda has to go up Sunday at 5:30, or does that mean Friday at 5:30?
It would be Sunday. It's
Okay.
24 hours. It doesn't make the exclusion for the weekends, the holidays,
Sure.
things like that. So,
That
yeah,
exclusion, I wasn't sure was present in
I
that.
don't think that's best practice.
Sure.
I don't think that's good.
I agree.
But under the law, you can do that.
Sure, okay. That was my question. Thank you.
Sure.
I believe in practice, we do put them out on Fridays, correct, Diana?
I think we do too. Because Diana's not in the office on Sunday
Exactly,
nights,
yeah.
which is fair to Diana.
Correct.
So, yeah, no, and I thought that we had to, Janet. I would
Yeah,
just-
Diana likes it when you call her over the weekend and say, hey, by the way.
You know, she would
loves
probably do it, but
I know she would.
it doesn't seem fair.
I think that's exactly right. All right.
I had one quick question. On the
for it.
repealing a motion, if we have a motion, we all vote on it, and then later we find out more information later in that meeting, can we recall that motion back for debate?
Yeah, the question is how you getting it back. Is it during the same meeting that you
Yeah,
find?
same meeting, that's what I was.
Yeah, and so you can bring the question back for reconsideration. The thing that, one of the rules on reconsideration, that it requires the maker of the motion has to be on the winning side of the motion. So let's say that you won by a vote of 4-3 to do something. You find out further information. One of the 4 votes says, boy, I don't know if I want to do that anymore, can make the motion to reconsider. It requires a majority vote to bring it back, but again, the maker of the motion has to be somebody on the winning side, okay, in that same meeting. If you get down the line, it gets a little more complicated, meaning that you leave the meeting, 2 days later, you find out that something is completely different than what you thought it was. All right, then you got to amend a motion, amend action previously taken. You have to reconsider, you have to rescind, you have a variety of ways to get it back before the body. But one of the rules is also that if the body or the administration has taken action in reliance upon that motion, you can't rescind, you can't amend, you can't take it back. So you have to be very careful about how you bring it back before the body. So I would suggest that you have a conversation with Diana and Joe. They can call us if there is a particular legal issue that's involved. There is a way to get it back, but it becomes a little bit more complicated as soon as you walk out that door, okay?
I had a question on the limit on the time for debate. I think you mentioned 10 minutes max.
Per speaker.
Okay. I couldn't remember. For some reason, I thought there was actually unlimited time. But so if the meeting is there ever a time where the chair can step in and cut off debate? Or did, like you mentioned, is it the body has to vote to say and debate?
The chair can do it as a matter of keeping order within the meeting. And so when you look at the rules of decorum in Robert's rules, one of the first ones is that the discussion has to be germane to the business before the assembly. The assembly is the board. And so if we see people veering off topic and talking about different things, it's incumbent upon the chair, you as the president, to say, I'm ruling this debate out of order. We're going to continue on to the next speaker. What's the remedy if somebody disagrees with you?
Then it goes to vote?
Appeal the ruling of the chair, and then it would go to a vote of this entire board. And if 4 votes say, no, we want Jeff to continue rambling on about how the Packers did last Sunday, unfortunately, we got to let Jeff ramble on about how the Packers did last Sunday. And so I think it's always best to instill a culture of formality. And I know that sounds weird because we're a small group. There's 7 of us, all right? We want to call each other by the first name, and we want to just roll up the sleeves and get work done. But a culture of formality allows us to remember that in this debate process, we're going to be very, very cognizant of it being relevant, germane to the topic that's before us. We're not going to make remarks about other people. We're not going to bring in our Packers stories. We're going to get done with the business that we need to get done. And so as difficult and as ridiculous as it may seem, I always prefer, whether it be a school board, a city council, a county board, Wisconsin legislature, whatever, that there be some air of formality to the process, because I think that helps. It helps a lot. Now, when we get into smaller work groups and committees, you don't follow the formalities, and that's fine, and Robert's rules recognizes that. That's okay. But as it relates to the very important business of the Board of Education, I like formality personally.
Our rules that we adopted does state that we follow for small boards. And as far as formality, I think we don't practice the standing up, only addressing the
right.
chair. I mean,
That's
sometimes
right.
we do talk with each other. Should we not talk to each other? Should we always be addressing the chair?
No, you can, and you're right. And the reason you adopted it for small boards is to get away from some of those formalities where I'm constantly calling you Madam President the entire process. And so it's okay to do that. My only suggestion, and it depends on the personalities and the culture and the environment that you create here, and whatever works. That's what I'm going to say you go with, is whatever works. I have just found in my experience that whenever we raise the level of formality, there's a tendency to really focus on the business as opposed to the personalities. You're right. Robert's rule says that we don't address these individual board members by name and direct our comments to the individual board members. Now, is that a hard and fast rule where as soon as it's violated, you get to call them out of order? Not necessarily. But again, depends on what type of culture you want to create here and how you're going to address that particular situation.
So what other rules of decorum have we established as a board that we are to
Can
recognize?
you turn your microphone on?
Yep.
I
Ready?
do.
Hear you.
I do.
I couldn't hear you.
Okay, sorry. What other rules of decorum have we established as a board that we need to follow during motions then and discussion?
Definitely, it should be the person who makes the motion is supposed to actually get to speak first, if I remember correctly, and the person that makes the second should have the right to speak second, and then from there, the chair generally recognizes people after that, but I know we've been loose on that. And then everybody needs the chance, like you mentioned already, to speak first. And then I, as the chair, actually, this is a question I was going to ask you. I, as the chair, I always wait to speak last. And you mentioned about if the chair is involved in debate to remove themselves from chairing. So I don't do that, but I speak last generally. I know, it's not perfect. Should I be passing it off to the vice president as
No, and here's again where we're a governmental body, we're a school board. And so, number one, you've adopted the small board's rules, and small boards say that the chair doesn't have to pass the gavel in order to debate a motion. The other problem I have is that people put you in the seat not as president of the school board, but as a member who's going to represent the electorate.
And
And I
that's-
think it's
yep.
unfair to the electorate to say that Janet doesn't get to talk on something. And so in my opinion, I think that you have the right to do that. Now, if it's a matter that is really personal to you for whatever reason, I think it's always best for you to step down, not necessarily because the rules require it, but you want to avoid some sort of appearance of bias. And so I don't know what the circumstances would be where you would have that type of situation. Let's say something involved one of your kids or something in the school district. I'm going to step down. I'm not going to engage in debate because I don't want to appear there to be biased, because as the chair, you have a lot of power to direct the debate and things. So I would step down in that circumstance. But absent that, I don't have any problem with you participating in the debate.
So have we ever gotten to the 10-minute point?
I don't think so.
I guess we haven't had,
I'm well over 10 minutes now.
10 minutes is a long time.
yes, it is. I mean, I know a privilege of the floor we limit, obviously, but I haven't been in board discussions on this side of the,
I don't think so.
Table yet?
I think maybe overall we've gotten into long debates, not just one person. It'll be several of us, and to the point where we realize we're not moving from there, and that's where the
Okay.
chair needs to step in. And then do we have to call a motion to end the debate then if not everybody's agreeing, they still want to speak at some
The
point?
chair
somebody
can end debate, but I think that would be subject to appeal. And I think that the proper way to deal with that under Robert's rules would be move the previous question.
Okay.
And then it's, if 2/3, if essentially what would that be? 5. You get 5 votes to move the previous question, you're going right to the vote.
Well, we've had times before where people have put a presentation up. So, I mean, I guess if it's a board member's presentation, you're probably getting close to 10 minutes.
And I think that's different because the presentation is sort of setting up the debate. So I think that's outside of the debate, I believe.
The presentation wouldn't be the motion.
Right,
The motions
correct.
was subject
Okay.
to the time limit.
Right.
And I put up this slide because it shows the importance of the role of the chair in any organization, in this case, your president, because it is up to your president to make sure that you go through the meeting in an orderly fashion, to move things through. And remember how I said that Robert's rules, it shouldn't be used as a sword by those folks that know parliamentary procedure. It's a shield to protect the rights of the minority, recognizing the rights of the majority to carry the day. There's a way to conduct business in a very quick fashion if you've got routine items before you, is that your chair can always ask for unanimous consent on a matter. Is there any objection to the adoption of the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is adopted. Is there any objection to, whatever routine item is before you? Hearing none, it's adopted. And so if at any point somebody has a question and wants to debate, wants to discuss something that's on the agenda, Madam Chair, Madam President, I raise a point of order. I would like this to be in the form of a formal motion. And at that point, the body owns it. It's not the chair. But there are ways to get things done quickly under Robert's rules while still following some level of fairness or formality, recognizing the rights of the minority.
Can we only have a motion if on the agenda it's been listed as an action item, since we're dealing with the open meetings law?
That's a great question. I get that question all the time. And it depends upon the particular wording on the agenda. What I always like to do, and not everybody follows this, but I always like to put on the agenda something that says all items listed on the agenda are subject to potential action by the board. And that way we never have to get into it. Because I have had situations where I'm parsing the meaning of the word discuss and deliberate. Well, does that mean action? Well, not really. It means discuss and deliberate. I don't know what action would be appropriate, but then something comes up in the debate, in the discussion, that action is a natural consequence of what was there. But if it's not on the agenda, does that mean that we didn't give the public notice that we were going to take official action? That's the problem. And so I always like to put on the agendas that action is possible on any of the items that are listed here. Unless you want to make it abundantly clear that we're not going to take action. You may want to do that for a variety of circumstances. I'm trying to think of a circumstance where we've had a worldwide pandemic with a lot of controversy in the last couple of years. But let's say that you're thinking about a mask mandate. That's an incredibly controversial subject, and that took up a lot of school board meeting time in the last year. And you're not going to take official action on adopting the mask mandate, but you want to get input from the public and from administration. And so you will put in big, bold letters on the agenda, we, under no circumstance, are going to take official action on a mask mandate at this meeting. You put it right there. You better not take official action in that circumstance. But then again, you're letting the public know that we want your input.
Andy, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So regarding a motion that has been brought before the body, and we're debating the motion, and then there's a question raised as to a board member's violation of our board code of ethics and the appearance of impropriety. How is that best addressed?
It's a point of order.
Sure. So you bring up a point of order.
You bring a point of order, and in that circumstance, again, it's a rather discrete issue. It's not something that I don't know if you want to air it in front of the entire board at a public meeting. And so you ask for a point of order, and
But
that
how can
would
you
be,
not air it in front of the whole board at a public meeting when it would violate open meetings laws to deal with it otherwise?
because if you ask to lay it on the table and then you confer with the chair and tell the chair what the circumstances are that lead you to believe that we've got an ethics issue here, and then it's up to the chair to make a determination as to whether that particular point of order ought to be overruled or if you ought to continue debate. In other words, it gives you a breathing time to have that conferral, to talk with the president and say, what are we going to deal? You might want to call legal counsel. You may want to consult with Mr. Garza. There are all sorts of things you may want to do. But again, motion to lay on the table or to recess or whatever it is to give you a couple of minutes to have a private conference with your school board president as to how you're going to deal with this.
If it's not on the agenda, though, and we do bring it up during that meeting, is that an issue? Because now the public didn't know that it was going to be on the agenda to discuss.
The ethics issue?
Yeah, the ethics issue.
But the ethics issue, I think, would be a sub-motion.
Yeah, it kind of deals with how, the procedure of how you're dealing with that
Right.
original main motion. And
Absolutely.
so I think that you can raise the ethics issue as it relates to that original main motion. Now, if you get into a debate about how you're going to deal with a particular, for example, punishment for violation of your ethics code, that's a problem. That's got to be on the agenda. But if you're just dealing with this question of whether a particular member has the right to vote on a particular subject according to your board policies, based upon an ethics concern, that's where I would ask for either a motion to lay on the table or take a brief recess, confer privately with the board president, say, look, I don't want to bring this up in front of everybody, but I think I got a concern here about so-and-so's vote on this. Given the ethics situation, how do we deal with this? It's the pause that allows you to do it. And ultimately, it's up to the chair to make that determination. If you disagree, you can appeal the ruling of the chair.
But if I disagreed with the determination of the chair, and the chair then would be forced into a vote about the appeal, and the majority of the board would control.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's right. We talked about the chair speaking in debate, and I want to talk about a couple of motions and misconceptions, many of which I think we've already covered. Nominations, the misconception is that you have to call for nominations 3 times. You don't. Everybody is eligible to serve in office on the school board. You don't have to second nominations. During the election process, Robert's Rules is very particular about how elections occur as it relates to board officers. Motion to lay on the table, we've talked about that. Motion to postpone, again, let's make sure that it's to a specific time unless it's intended to be a motion for indefinite postponement. Motion to adopt an entire report. Let's say that Mr. Garza is coming to you and providing a report on a particular issue you asked Mr. Garza to look into. After the report is done, I've seen several boards, committees, whatever it might be throughout the state, say, motion to receive the report and place on file. Second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, motion, the report is received and placed on file. As soon as that happens, it's your report. It's not Mr. Garza's report anymore. From a legal standpoint, that may not be good, because as your attorney, I may not want the Board of Education to have endorsed the full report. So unless you are 100% confident that you 100% agree with everything in that 43-page report, it is not appropriate to have an official action receiving that report and placing it on file. The better course is to thank Mr. Garza for the report, and that's it, and it's done. It's available to the public as a record, that's fine, but it doesn't become the board's report.
So if we approve reports, I think,
I would
right?
rather you didn't, as a
Okay.
matter of course. Maybe that's something we can talk with Mr. Garza about. I would rather you not. The issue doesn't come up very often. It doesn't. And so us lawyers are trained to look for every boogeyman behind a rock out there. That's what we do.
So it's
And-
our monthly financials is one of the things that we approve.
If you're 100% confident that those are the financials and you can approve them, then go ahead and approve them. But if you're not required to, just take the report.
But that's the thing, is the money's already been spent. Our monthly financial reports have already been spent. There's nothing we could change, really.
So
Okay.
approving it really doesn't
But
change.
what-
Approving it doesn't really.
What I think he's saying is that if basically he doesn't want us to ratify it.
Yeah.
He doesn't want us to say, we ratified that it's accurate, that it's 100% what we meant to do, because if we do so, we incur potential legal liability if there's somehow some error that's actionable.
And let's imagine that Mr. Garza, he would never do this, but he was misappropriating funds. He submits a report to you. We find out that he has been misappropriating funds, and we want to hold him accountable for that.
But we-
His defense is, I gave you the report every month, and you adopted that report. You knew exactly what I was doing. That's the problem. That's how it could come up. Again, this isn't something that comes up very often, and hopefully it never happens here. But as a general rule, I always advise clients, don't adopt reports unless you have to for some reason.
Do we have to adopt that?
What's that?
Do we have to adopt that and the employment services report? If we don't have to, then I would prefer we.
I think we've got a statutory duty as far as the employment services report, because we've got a separate duty on that.
Right, this is generally whether or not we're accepting what's going on with people leaving,
Because-
coming and going and hiring and firing and blah, 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 right?
We're the agent that has to ratify those actions.
Yeah, that I think we got.
Sorry,
For
the
exa-
employment service report, you're right. It was what's the other?
For example, to that point,
Donation
contracts are
report, is
held
that
by
in
the
there too, or
board,
no?
not administration. That's why you'd want that.
Right.
That's the other one, the student behaviors and all that stuff.
Well, those are just like district reports.
Consent.
Those are not, we don't put those on as action items though, so
That's just a report, right?
Yeah, sometimes we just have reports and sometimes we actually vote on something.
But we
Okay,
approved
we
it.
should,
It's not agenda.
yeah,
Sorry.
maybe that's something we'll go back and look at, so we
Yeah.
probably need to keep moving, because I know we
Yep,
have lots
sorry.
of
I'm
questions.
down to 10 minutes. I've got to cover another 47 slides in 10 minutes. This will be fun. All right. What about public comment? I know that I and Chrissy have been involved in evaluation of certain situations coming before this board as it relates to folks holding up banners, wearing T-shirts, making comments during public comment. How is it that we can restrict public comment to make sure that the comments are, again, relevant to the business that's before the board, yet also respect the commenters' First Amendment rights, because they have constitutional privilege as it relates to making these comments? And so I want you to know there's a whole body of law out there that relates to this whole concept of public comments, what's inbounds, what's out of bounds in public comment as it relates to constitutional privilege. So this is a big challenge. Does anybody remember the Wisconsin statute that provides that a school board has to provide a period of public comment?
There isn't one.
There isn't one, that's right. So you don't have to do it. You can eliminate it altogether. But you want to see a bunch of folks storming the castle, go ahead and eliminate public comment. Let's see how that goes. And so that's always my first point to folks who are having problems with public comment. Can you eliminate it? And the answer is typically no, we just can't. As a matter of course, we have to allow public comment. So how do we create the boundaries to make sure that the public comment is relevant to what it is that we're discussing and it doesn't get out of hand as it relates to the public sentiment? So first, we established that this school board meeting, it's a public forum. It's a limited public forum, though. What do I mean by that? A public forum in the traditional sense is like the courthouse square or the public park, where you have people get up and they have the freedom to say whatever is on their mind, and that freedom is protected by the First Amendment. Then there's this concept of a limited public forum where, yeah, people can speak their mind, but we also have a recognition by our court system that they don't get to do or say whatever they want like they could at the courthouse square or in the public park, because we have business to conduct. We're in a meeting. And so in the concept of a limited public forum, the board has the opportunity to enact what are called viewpoint neutral place, time, and manner restrictions on the speech. Viewpoint neutral means we are not going to restrict the particular position that you're taking, but we are going to place time limits, we are going to regulate obscenities, and we are going to make sure that whatever comments you make are germane or relevant to what it is that this school board is considering. And so again, is the interest in an orderly meeting a legitimate government interest? It absolutely is. So that means we have the right to regulate. Now, drawing the lines of regulation can be challenging. And so, again, here, Steinberg versus Chesterfield County Planning Commission. The court upheld the validity of a rule requiring a speaker during public comment to address only items germane to the agenda. Why is that important? Because do we want to provide a public comment period where people can come in and speak their mind on any issue impacting education here in New Berlin? Maybe, that may be what you want, but oftentimes that leads to a lot of different topics, a lot of different discussions that have nothing to do with the agenda that's before you at that particular meeting. And so I've suggested that one way to cut down on the very lengthy public comment period is to make sure that whoever is providing comments speaks to an issue that's relevant to the agenda that's before the board that particular meeting, all right? That, again, puts the power in the hands of the chair to call somebody who's at public comment out of order, because the comments have to be relevant to the businesses before the board at that particular meeting. What happens if you don't have a rule against the use of profanity? Can you prohibit it? Worse yet, what if we have a member of the board who actually uses profanity and then we try to punish a commenter for utilizing profanity? You can see the different rabbit holes that lawyers have crawled down over the years as it relates to the analysis of this issue and how it can be so challenging. Can obscenity be defined by the board chair? Can Ms. Schultz determine what is or is not going to be obscene? Our Supreme Court can't even decide what is obscene and what's not obscene. How can your board chair do it? How can your president do it? Should we have a definition of obscenity within our board policies that we can lean back on and rely upon in calling somebody out of order? Maybe, but it's very definitionally, it's difficult to define what is or is not going to be obscene. So again, it's a challenge. Imposing time limits on public comment. Do you have anything in your board policies imposing time limits? What is
Yes.
it, 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
30 minutes.
So that's
now.
good. It's great that we have that. Let's enforce that, because as soon as we start varying from that and let somebody talk for 5 minutes, then we try to cut off the next person at 3 minutes, we're going to have problems. We got to make sure we enforce that.
But Andy, the other restriction we've got is no more than 30 minutes. So if we have more than 10 speakers, then we don't have enough time to hear them all.
We do have a provision in that policy that
That
says
allows-
if there's a vote to extend it 30 minutes, we can do that.
Yeah, but I'm just asking if we don't, I've never heard us actually take a vote on that, have you?
We haven't done it since we updated the policy, because that wasn't in the previous policy.
I know Amy has, when Amy was president, I remember she did. But
We went over already in the last year. I know we did.
I guess my question is whether that 30-minute cap is problematic.
I don't
it's carrying
think it
over.
is. Chrissy, has there been a case on that? I'm not aware of any case on that, but everything that I have read and seen suggests that the cap is fine.
Okay.
Because what if we have 1,000 people that are waiting to speak? I mean, they could eliminate. the
I would be
entire
wildly
meeting.
impressed if we had that much public engagement.
Yes,
Because this is
as
mostly
would
what the
I.
room usually looks like,
As
right
would
here.
I. Right.
So,
Right.
I think the other thing that you pointed on too is we have a lot of speakers that speak about votes at previous meetings. And based on what you were just saying, that would be out of order for that meeting because.
only
it's not
if
an-
we amend our policy. We haven't amended our policy. I'm not sure that that's such a great change that we would make because we do things and then people wouldn't have a chance to come and tell us how they feel about it if it's not on the agenda anymore. So if you say you want to change the privilege of the floor policy to say that people cannot comment on things that are not on the agenda, then you're significantly cutting off the public voice and you're significantly cutting off people who may want to comment on things we've done in the past. I don't think that's a good policy.
That's the flip side. That is the flip side. That's absolutely right. It depends on, if public comment typically proceeds in an orderly fashion and people are respectful, they don't use obscenities, profanity, and attack board members, and they limit themselves to 3 minutes, there's no reason to change it. It's when it gets out of hand. That's where we have issues, and that's where we have to consider the variety of measures at our disposal to try to bring that entire concept back into what we consider the boundaries of acceptable conduct during public comment. We have the ability to enact content-neutral restrictions, time, place, manner, as it relates to signs, T-shirts, and banners. It's a minefield as to determining what is going to be considered disruptive in any particular circumstance.
I have a question about that, Andy. So logistically, how do you do that? Because we had somebody come to a board meeting about a year ago carrying a sign that said KKK on it. That was problematic. So how do you regulate that in the middle of a meeting? What do
It
you
wasn't
do?
brought into the meeting room, though.
It was
wasn't-
in the
nobody
building.
saw it in
But
here.
right, no, but I'm saying for the sake of fair. I'm saying for the sake of argument. What if it was brought in? How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a
As-
tough one.
I
You
mean-
could could call for a recess. Theoretically, all right, in theory, let's say that's disruptive. We make a determination, that's disruptive. We can't have that sign in the meeting. We recess for 5 minutes. We can always call the police and ask them to come and escort somebody out. We can ask them to leave. If they don't leave, I have a right to stand here with my KKK sign, and I'm going to stand here with my KKK sign. Sir, madam, you're disrupting this meeting. That's offensive. We're asking you one more time to leave. If you don't, we're going to call the local police force. And then you have an opportunity to call police, and that's disorderly conduct. If you make a determination that that's disruptive to your meeting, it's disorderly conduct. They have the ability to escort that person out. That's an extreme example.
Sure. And
But
when you
that's
say
the
that
remedy.
you've got the authority to do that, you're talking about the chair. Right? It would be incumbent upon the chair.
And
I mean,
then
let's
if you
say Janet
disagreed
didn't
with
see
the
it.
chair,
Right.
then we vote.
We have, well,
Yeah.
sure.
Someone has to make a motion to you to
Right.
say, let's recess and let's take a vote on, is this disruptive, I guess. Would we take a public vote if we believe that's disruptive?
Everything has to be public except for.
Well, that's what I-
Yeah.
All
It
votes
does.
in
It
that
does.
circumstance.
But you don't have to go to a vote. If your board president says that's disruptive, I'm asking that person to leave. If a majority of you say that's not disruptive whatsoever, you can appeal the ruling of the chair.
How do you get your majority if you don't vote?
You have to get to a vote on that. You absolutely do to
That
appeal
would-
the
that's what I
ruling
was
of the
getting
chair.
After if the body disagrees with the chair's determination, then it goes to vote.
That's
Right,
correct.
okay.
That's correct.
And then the chair has to deliver that message to that individual.
That's right. That's right. All right, so this is what a bad meeting looks like, and this is an actual parliament in an actual country. Does anybody know what country this is from? Because I had this picture for probably 10 years. I think it goes back to 2010. I had this. That's from the Ukraine.
I was going to say Ukraine.
That's the Ukraine parliament.
Wow.
And that was a very interesting meeting. So I've utilized my time, and I've still got open meetings law to cover. You guys want me to continue?
Yes.
Are you just riveted, or are you saying I
How
need
much is it going to
more?
cost?
I am,
You're very astute. Ms. Hanson negotiated a flat fee for this.
Okay.
Oh,
We don't have closed session for 15 minutes.
Yeah, we have time. So
we have
Okay,
closed
good.
session
Let's go
whenever
through open
we
meeting.
need to have closed session.
yeah.
I want to talk about open meetings law, and again, cover what I think is going to be most relevant to you, understanding there's a lot of information on these slides. But I want to start with this very basic premise in 19.81 of the statutes. To implement and ensure the public policy herein expressed, the open meetings law policy, all meetings of all state and local governmental bodies shall be publicly held in places reasonably accessible to members of the public and shall be open to all citizens at all times unless otherwise expressly provided by law. That provision is given liberal construction, meaning that in all circumstances, a court is going to err on the side of open government as opposed to closed government. And so whenever you have an open meetings law case, and Chrissy and I have tried several open meetings law cases, it's always tough because we represent governmental agencies. We go into court with one hand tied behind our back. And so always err on the side of being open as it relates to compliance with the open meetings law.
So I'm going to stop you right there with a question. Especially during COVID, we had restrictions on the number of people in the room. And of course, that was also during a time when there was a lot of interest in what was going on in these meetings. So not everybody was able to be in the room, but they were able to watch the meeting out in the cafeteria area. So I'm guessing that was okay under the circumstances, but can it ever be that if you don't have a large enough space to conduct the meeting, could that ever be an issue?
It's a reasonableness issue. In other words, what's reasonable under the circumstances? Would it ever be reasonable for you to place the wall here and say, oh, there's no room for anybody to be here, you're just going to have to watch on TV? That's not reasonable. A room this size, I mean, you've got chairs set up for a whole lot of people that aren't here. And so nobody could ever say that they were prohibited access to this meeting. There may be circumstances, though, where you find out of a particularly contentious issue and administration has received 175 letters from folks saying they're going to be at that meeting. You put it in a small classroom, you're avoiding the public participation in that meeting. And so you're going to be found to have not made accommodation to make that meeting reasonably accessible to the public. So it's a reasonableness determination under the circumstances. All right. This is important because it actually applies to a school district case that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But it applies to governmental bodies which are defined as, and then it has a list. The important part of this statute, though, is it's those bodies that are created by Constitution, statute, ordinance, rule, or order, or a formally constituted subunit of any of the foregoing. And so why is that important? Because when we look at open meetings law application, to whom does the open meetings law apply? We look at the source of authority where that body got its power as opposed to what it's called or other attributes of that particular body. That becomes important because we have this case of Krieger versus Appleton Area School District. It went all the way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And in that circumstance, the Wisconsin Supreme Court found that a body that was comprised of teaching staff going through a 9th grade book list and determining which books they think, not that the board thinks, but they think as teachers ought to be included on the 9th grade reading list, that body was a governmental body subject to the open meetings law. And the reason the court found that is because there was a board policy in place that spoke to curriculum development. And within that policy, it had suggested creating a body comprised of teaching staff to review curriculum and make a recommendation. And so the Supreme Court superimposed the reading list body onto, it was a 346.1, was that the number of it, 346.1? You argued the case. Onto the circumstance and said that board policy applies such that a rule exists creating this particular body here, so the open meetings law is going to apply to that body. Point of this is that if you look at your board policies, you may have application of the open meetings law to groups that you never thought it would apply to. So you've got to be careful about open meetings law compliance. What types of meetings are covered? It's called the showers test. It's the 2 Ps, people and purpose. If there are enough people at the meeting to conduct governmental business, and that meeting is convened for the purpose of conducting governmental business, you've got a meeting under the open meetings law. That doesn't mean when all of you get together to watch the Packer game that you've got a meeting, because even though we've got the entire school board gathered, we don't have the purpose of engaging in governmental business. So we haven't met the second prong, the second P of the showers test.
And how does that go with the issue of possible quorums? Because we are sometimes together, more than 4 of us, in a non-meeting setting. So generally, like for example, at graduations, when we have high school graduations, there can be 4 or more of us in a room, but we're not convened for the purpose of managing any kind of business.
That's right. So that's, you don't
So
get the
then
second-
we're not required to give a notice of
That's
possible quorum.
exactly right.
So,
But
There we go.
as soon as the 4 of you get together and say, hey, you know what, did you take a look at that financial report that Joe submitted?
Sure.
What do you think about that?
but that's why we never do
That's a
that.
problem. I know you
We would
never
never do that.
There is never a circumstance where you talk about anything school board related outside of a school board meeting. I know
sir.
that, and that's why I
Never.
have extreme confidence in representing you.
I don't even know what you're
So much
talking
fun. Right.
Diane, haven't you put out notices, though, whenever there's school
She
activities
has.
where 4 or more of us might be there?
I have.
Just to,
Got to. There's
I think it's with an abundance of caution that Diana has done that, but I don't believe that that's required under the statutes.
It's like even homecoming
Yeah.
games, I think I would even put out.
Sure.
Notice of possible quorum.
Yes, that's an abundance of caution. There is no such violation of the law called overcompliance.
Right, exactly, right.
It doesn't exist.
But I'm just saying that in the event that we don't want to lay more on Diana or her successor, I think that may be an important thing to remember.
I would agree.
Yeah.
All right, so we look at this whole concept of number of members present. We talked about 4 school board members that are at a particular event. That is a quorum of the school board. What's this concept of negative quorum?
Oh, I know.
Are there enough votes there in order to affect the way that business is conducted? What is a quorum of this board? Tonight's meeting, how many of you had to show up in order for it to be a valid meeting of the school board?
4.
So how many people are needed to be present in order to affect the outcome of any particular item of business coming before this
4.
board? 2.
Oh.
2, you need a majority vote to carry. 4-person board,
as
2
we're-
votes yes, 2 votes no, that motion fails. All right?
Well, that's true.
So in this circumstance, a negative quorum with a 7-member board is 2, if your quorum requirement says 4. So you have to be careful about this concept of negative quorum because everybody thinks, oh, it's just 4. 4 is what's required in order to affect business. Well, actually, it's 2 because you might have had 3 no-shows at this meeting, and that can be challenging. And that especially gets challenging when we get into this concept of a walking quorum. And we look at the definition of a walking quorum. And I love this definition. It's a series of gatherings among separate groups of members of a governmental body, each less than quorum in size, who agree tacitly or explicitly to act uniformly in sufficient number to reach a quorum. Now, here's your homework. Tell me the difference between the definition of a walking quorum and politics. There is no difference. And so when we were talking before about how I know you never talk about school board business outside of a school board meeting, I know you all do, all right? And as your lawyer, it's my job to sit up here and say, don't you dare do that. But I know as soon as I say that, you're going to go do it anyways. But I'm suggesting be very careful about it. Be very careful about it. And the way that somebody's going to find out about a walking quorum is that you're going to show up at the next meeting and it's already going to be preordained what action you're taking. There's going to be no debate on a very controversial item. And who's going to notice that there's no debate on a very controversial item? The press, all right? They're going to notice that and they're going to start scratching their head and say, I wonder what was going on here. It's not a coincidence that all of the cases that you see under the open meetings law and the public records law are typically newspaper names, all right? There's a reason for that. They're watchdogs on this stuff. So you have to be very careful about how you deal with business that relates to the board outside of a board meeting. Petitions, you can always petition for a meeting, but you can't petition for a particular result. We know that during the pandemic, we had certain issues and concerns as it relates to open meetings compliance in a virtual environment. What we are doing is grafting modern technology in a law that was written over 40 years ago. That's a challenge, but it doesn't mean that the law doesn't apply. We still have to comply with open meetings law no matter how challenging it might be, no matter what environment we're meeting in, whether it be telephonic, by Zoom, by Google Meet, whatever it is, we have to comply with the open meetings law. I want to get to a particular slide here that I love. And it shows the danger of modern means of communication as it relates to open meetings law compliance. This was a city council meeting in Madison, and the press noticed that during the meeting, as debates going on, they saw all sorts of members of the city council doing this and put their phone away. Then they pull their phone out again, and they keep doing. And so somebody got the bright idea of making a public records request for all of the text messages that city council members had created during that particular council meeting. And lo and behold, they were actually engaging in discussion about the item of business that was before the council. Some of those text messages. The meeting is so peaceful with Bridget not speaking to me. You are a hoot. You really have no idea the difference her silence makes. Help. I can't always carry it all on my shoulders. I've really done nothing but help. How awesome would it be to see those text messages show up in the Journal Sentinel and be attributed to members of this Board of Education? That'd be awful, all right? So again, you have to be very wary of what's going on as it relates to the modern methods of communication and the implications under the open meetings law that applies to text messages, email communications, phone conversations, whatever. A lot of that information is going to be accessible through the public records law. So be very careful about communicating items of official business through those technological means. Let's see here. No, it's not advancing. Have I hit my official time limit? People generally have a right to record meetings. That's often misunderstood under the law, that we have to make available. We don't have to make recording material available, but we have to make the meeting accessible to somebody who wants to record the meeting if that's what they want to do. Audio and visual, they do not have a right to do that in closed session. We have to be reasonably specific as it relates to the agenda for a particular meeting. That applies even in circumstances involving a closed session portion of the meeting. And again, it's to apprise the public as to what we're doing. Again, there's no penalty for overcompliance. Now, there are special considerations as it relates to closed session, because typically there's a reason we're going into closed session. We don't want the public to know that we've got a personnel problem within our, allied arts department, because everybody's going to know who that is. And so we have to be very careful, because we have reputational interests at stake. At the same time, we have to give the public notice of what it is that we're going to consider in closed session. And so I've got a couple of slides in here that relate to the exemptions allowing for closed session. It's not enough to simply cite the statute. We also have to provide a plain English version of what it is that we're going to accomplish in closed session. Who may attend closed session? That's always a concern as well. I always say it's who needs to know, who has a need to know the information that's discussed in closed session, because what I have seen in the past with certain bodies is that they allow almost everybody to be in the closed session. Well, at that point, why do you have a closed session? So limit closed session participation to only those persons with a need to know. What could happen if you have improper disclosure of actual things that were discussed in closed session? This question comes up because I often get the call, what's the penalty if so-and-so went out and started blabbing about what we discussed in closed session? Does anybody know the penalty? There isn't one, okay? Nobody can be prosecuted for the crime of talking about what happened in closed session. But you're going to significantly undermine the confidence that the public has in your body if you start talking about things outside closed session. You're going to make your lawyers very upset when they think that there is just a small group of people who know this information, and we've come to find out that everybody knows this information. If we were in closed session with you, giving you advice on how to handle a particular situation, you may have lost the attorney-client privilege, in which case we can be called as witnesses to talk about what was discussed in closed session. In other words, there are some real-life consequences. Even though the statutes don't provide a penalty, so to speak, there are some real-life consequences that are rather dire for going out and talking about matters that were discussed in closed session. So yes, I've run through an awful lot, and I'm happy to stay as long as you'd like me to answer questions. What I will suggest is this, and I'll leave you with this. You're going to go through the PowerPoint, and you may have some particular questions or issues. We're happy to come back and continue this discussion, because anything that we can do to assist you in getting back to the really important business that's before you, to give you a process and procedure that works, we're happy to do it. So just let us know.
I had one question, Eddie, before you go. Regarding your firm's representation of the district, who is your client?
The district is our client.
Okay, so it's not individual board members.
Correct.
Okay, so under that circumstance, where you get a call from an individual board member who wants to ask you questions about a potential conflict of interest, are you beholden to advise him about such conflict of interest? And if so, under what circumstance?
Well, I would very much prefer those questions go through your board president, and
Sure.
that the board president has communication with me or with Chrissy, or for that matter, Mr. Garza. It comes through Mr. Garza to do that. It typically, and I say typically because there's an exception to every rule, but typically if we get a call like that, we are going to advise that particular person to confer with the board president, who can then reach out to legal counsel. Because number one, we don't want to do something that is going to impact the organization as a whole, which we represent. Mm-hmm. But number two, I don't think everybody on this board has the opportunity to simply order up legal. That comes at a cost. And so that would be the other concern.
Sure, so I think that sounds like a good policy. And if an individual board member, for example, had a potential conflict of interest, then it seems to me that it would be incumbent upon that board member to seek legal advice from somebody who was qualified to give it to them outside of the district's lawyers.
Depending on the circumstances, I mean, again, there are implications to that beyond just that individual board member, because again, depending on the circumstances, you may have, if there's a conflict of interest and board member voted or board member had some authority over the contract, then you raise the prospect of that contract being void, which would not be good for the district. So in that circumstance, I think district counsel would be involved, and individual lawyer might be involved as well. I think it just kind of depends.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And are we going to get this PowerPoint? Where is the PowerPoint going to pop up? Stay and have it?
I've just attached it to the packet.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I got it 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know why she's so late on this.
I just don't believe you.
I know. It's because I'm a lawyer, as are you.
I know.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you
That's
very much. It's
lot
been
of
a pleasure.
information.
And we love working with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if board members, if you go through the packet and you have more questions and you would like to see us have another work session, just let me know. And we'll consider it at another meeting. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I guess we have to officially adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Madam President, I move to recess into closed session pursuant to Section 19.851C E and F of the Wisconsin statute to consider, A, the approval of closed session minutes of May.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
No.
We're not doing that. Yeah.
We have to actually-
We need to
I wasn't
adjourn the
paying
work
I'll make a
session
motion to
before-
adjourn.
We have to adjourn
the
this
work
session before we move into the next session.
I was going to say his enthusiasm is impressive, right?
I'll make a motion to move in, to adjourn
To
the
adjourn
closed
this
session.
meeting, yes.
Or the work session.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion from Mr. Seidel, a second by Mr. Helmer to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Any opposed? Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned. Now, let's move on to our regular meeting. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 6:49 p.m. and our quorum of members is present, so the meeting of the Board of Education of the School District of New Berlin is called to order. Please call the roll.
Ms. Crosby. Here. Mr. Helmer.
Here.
Ms. Connick.
Here.
Mr. Kurth. Here. Ms. Schulz.
Here.
Mr. Seidel.
Here.
Ms. Wondercheck.
Here.
I would entertain a motion to recess to close session at this time.
Madam President, I move to recess into closed session pursuant to Section 19.851C E and F of the Wisconsin statutes to consider A, the approval of closed session minutes of May 23rd, B, employment services report, and that's it.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Kurth, a second by Mr. Helmer. Please call the roll.
Mr. Kurth. Mr. Helmer.
Yes.
Ms. Crosby. Yes. Ms. Connick.
Yes.
Ms. Schulz.
Yes.
Mr. Seidel.
Yes.
Ms. Wondercheck.
Yes.
Motion passes. We are moving into closed session and will return to open session around 7 o'clock. It is now 7:06, and we are returning from closed session into open session. In recognition of the serious and important nature of our efforts here, we will join in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. For all those who are able, please rise. And now for those who wish to prepare for the meeting, we will have a moment of silence. This is a public meeting of the Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, notice was given to the public last Friday by providing the agenda to the city library. The agenda was also posted on the district website. A copy of the agenda was forwarded to the Journal Sentinel, the Waukesha Freeman, and the Waukesha Now, all of which have filed requests for all public notices. We begin this evening with some recognitions. We have our Career Explorations Partnership Spotlight and some additional recognitions.
I'd like to invite our Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning, Kelly Kwiatkowski, up to recognize our awardee.
Thank you. So tonight I'm here to recognize Brown. As you know, we had a class that was formerly called Advanced Innovation and Design. In the last 2 years, we didn't run it for various reasons during spring, but after a little hiatus, we had our 4th renovation of the class, and it's actually called Innovate Now. The students helped us rebrand the class to make it more identifiable for students, but really it's a capstone course where students solve business problems with the businesses. So it's an opportunity for students to be innovative, creative, use the skills and knowledge that they've gained the last few years to apply it. We were lucky enough to have Brown supply us with 2 different challenges for student groups, both at New Berlin West, as well as mentor students, as well as give students tours. So we couldn't do the class without them. They supplied almost half of our challenges for students. And this was actually the first year where we used real business issues and worked with real businesses in the class. Before we had hypothetical issues that were given to us by the Commons, and then we had business mentors. So we had both this year, business mentors and authentic challenge solutions. So thank you very much to Brown. And before I hand it off to them, I'm gonna hand it off to Emily Makakanja, who is a graduate of New Berlin West, to say a few words about the class.
Hi, everybody. I really enjoyed the class. You could say that most school classes are like related to the real world, but they aren't, but Innovate was. So it was nice to be able to see a problem that a business was having and talk to different homeowners and talk to different business people and look online and do all of this different research and find a solution, which we were then able to present formally. We had our luncheon, when was that, 2 weeks ago? So it was a really great experience, and I'm thankful for Brown for stepping in and giving us the opportunity.
Here are some of the pictures that our students from Brown were presenting during this day, so you can see that. And then some of the tour pictures. So a huge thank you to Brown. We also have Melissa Bonson, who is one of the teachers for Innovate at New Berlin West. And the other teacher was Miss Erica Duggar, who both of them did a great job. We expect high turnout for the course again next year. So thank you very much to Mr. Jim Bone from Brown.
I'd like to thank everybody here at New Berlin High School. Again, we're located up in Hartford, Wisconsin, so a little bit of drive down, but it was well worth it, and we really appreciate what the students did back in late February when we met them, all the way to May when they actually were able to present their presentation. They worked hard. Sometimes they didn't realize what they really had to do to get where they had to get to, but it was a real learning experience for them. And Brian Walnutz, who was the other mentor at our company, we really enjoyed working with the students and look forward to potentials of future years. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Why don't we have Kevin Fitzgerald come up and present the next recognitions for us?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Kevin Fitzgerald, Director of Athletics and Activities at New Berlin Eisenhower, and I'm here to recognize and thank Waukesha State Bank and Miss Stephanie Olfs, Vice President of Waukesha State Bank and our Marketing Director over at Waukesha State Bank. And thanks to a 5-year commitment at over $35,000 commitment to both New Berlin Eisenhower and New Berlin West. In regards to that sponsorship, they're going to be the naming sponsor for the Eisenhower concession stand right outside our upper gym. And they're also going to have a space in the New Berlin West Fieldhouse, the Drexel Fieldhouse, and be the sponsor for the indoor track. And we couldn't be more happy to have this type of sponsorship. They obviously are deeply rooted in our community and in our state. They have 14 locations in Waukesha County, of course, one here in New Berlin, and we couldn't be more proud to partner with them. And I'd like to introduce Miss Stephanie Olfs, again, Vice President of Waukesha State Bank.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm extra excited because I'm also a parent in the school district. So my son just finished up first grade over at Orchard Lane. So this is an extra exciting partnership with the school district. And like Kevin said, Waukesha State Bank, we are a community bank. And so that means that our mission is founded on supporting the communities that we serve. So one of the big pieces of that is supporting education and families. And so this partnership with both New Berlin Eisenhower and West is right up our alley, and we're super excited to be part of it. So, and excited to partner over the next 5 years and hopefully longer. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all.
We'll have Kelly Kwiatkowski come back up and introduce the scholarship recipients for the World Affairs Seminar.
Each year, we are honored to recognize 2 of our students who've earned a scholarship through the World Affairs Seminar. The Rotary, as well as the School District of New Berlin, help sponsor these students to attend. So if I could bring Graham McKenzie from West up and Molly McCormick from Eisenhower up, as well as the Rotary representatives, Dave Gresk and Megan Soderberg. So Graham and Molly earned a scholarship next week to attend the World Seminars. This year's theme is reimagining healthcare. Within the pandemic and how everyone was impacted by the pandemic and different government policy laws, they'll be examining that and thinking through and reimagining what could be different for the next one. So they'll be hard at work with other leaders all across the country at Carroll Universities next week. So congratulations, Molly and Graham.
I just wanted to thank the school district and the Rotary Club for this amazing opportunity. I'm looking forward to hopefully learning a lot and meeting people from all over the country to hopefully bring that learning back to the community. Thank you.
Similar to Graham, I just also want to say thank you for this opportunity. I'm really excited to learn and work with other people and hopefully bring that back to here in the school district.
Thank you. Upon completion of the seminar, they do present their information at the Rotary Club at a luncheon, and then they also do meet with us to tell us what they've learned and maybe what we could do differently or think about. So congratulations, students. We look forward to hearing from you.
At this time, I'd like our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Kelly Sanders, to please come up. As the board is aware, annually we select different groups and individuals who are extremely deserving of the work and volunteerism and support that they provide to our students, our staff, our school district, and our community. Recipients of this award have included Linden Grove, as well as our home and school associations, which were the recipients last school year. This year, I'll hand it over to Kelly to kind of announce those receiving those awards this year.
So if I can have my friends come on up here with me from Family Services, the Litkeys, Tracy. So these are our friends who are part of our Mental Health Advisory Committee. They have been members, since our inception about 5 years ago. So as you have heard and during our presentations here, we have parents that are participating, community members, and Family Services is our mental health provider for the district. So we could not do this work without these wonderful individuals who have donated their time. And the first recipient this evening is the Litkeys. So I wanted to make sure that you guys saw that you were a member of our committee. Thank you. Not only have the Litkeys played such a vital role in the committee, but they have also made specific donations to Family Services to also help cover any additional expenses that some of our families may not be able to pay for receiving mental health care. And we are grateful that they have been gracious enough to participate in this committee. So thank you very much for your involvement in this. Did you want to say anything or no? I know, I'm totally putting you on the spot. You can say no. I'm good with that.
Well, I think this has been something that's obviously important to us. And we wanted to make sure that we continue to recognize and understand and push forward for mental health issues. And we'll just keep pushing for those things to be brought up younger and younger and younger students so that people know that it's okay not to be okay. So, thanks. Thank
You won't like us sometimes. And actually, we would like to recognize that I think that there's some really steps forward that have been taken in the last couple of years, and it's everybody here, and it's Kelly, and it's the staff, and it's I know that the heart's in the right place, and I think that we're working toward the right area. That's all I got.
Thank you. Our next recipient is Tracy Stanislawski, and she is a parent of a student over at West, and Tracy's been involved in the committee, I think, for the last 2 or 3 years. And really, her background is in this area, so her insights have been exceptionally vital. I always appreciate Tracy's like, I don't mean to bother you, but I'm sending you another email about blank. And I always appreciate getting those emails, and so Tracy, thank you very much for your participation.
So as Kelly said, mental health is near and dear to my heart as a professional and also as a parent of a child with mental health concerns, and it's very important as a district that we work toward that. And I really think Kelly has taken those awesome steps, and not just Kelly, but the whole team, to make sure that mental health is a priority at West and within the district. And I thank Kelly, too, for taking all of my emails and saying, Kelly, did you hear this? Did you hear this? Hey, Kelly, how about this? But she responds right away, and I really appreciate that, because I think without her and without the drive that we have, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you.
Tiffany was literally flying to get here, so I'm going to go with Family Services next. So if my Family Services partners can come up here. So Family Services is our mental health provider in the district. We have a memorandum of understanding with them. They provide 3 days of service at both of our secondary buildings. We have a therapist that comes on site to work with the students on site. They are full. We have students, all of our slots are full, and we are continuing to partner with them, as well as some other partners to find some more care at our elementary level. All therapy providers are having a hard time staffing right now, and that's nothing new for Family Services as well, but we appreciate them partnering with us. So for that, you get a Friends of Education Award. So here you go.
I did not realize we were getting this.
No.
Yes, so thank you for that.
You are very welcome. Did you want to say anything?
I was just saying to Dr. Kelly, I did not realize that we were going to receive an award. Our job is to be here to thank you and thank our families and supporters. So my name is Crystal Winter. I'm the executive director. Yes, I still get choked up. My job is to make sure that every dollar, every penny is spent wisely and to support the folks actually doing the work. This is Layla, your school supervisor, and she, because we are spread thin, serving the needs of the community, is doing about 3 jobs right now as a school supervisor and also seeing youngsters herself. So thank you for this honor, Dr. Kelly, not expecting it. We were here to thank you and to thank you for allowing us to serve you and these beautiful families. So Layla, did you want to say anything? Okay, yeah. I usually don't need a microphone. That's why they hired me for the job. Thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Okay, I dragged us out as long as I could, Tiffany, so come on up. So Tiffany Mercer is another parent in the district who is on our mental health committee. She has been a member since day one, and we are very grateful to have her as a partner. She also works for an organization called Growing Minds that has actually done a lot of professional development for our staff. They have done parent universities for us. They've done a couple of sessions for our families as well. And so, Tiffany, thank you for being a friend of education. And here is your award.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all. I just want to thank you all very much. That's quite a nice honor. And I've really enjoyed being part of this committee, and I believe in the work that we're doing to promote mental health and well-being in the New Berlin community. And I really appreciate all this work that the community has done, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're going to go take a picture.
Hey, Joe, can I ask you a question about the mental health? I know that Kelly indicated that those slots are full. So do we have kids who are still waiting to be, sorry, Kelly. Okay. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I know you're going to take a picture. I won't keep you long. Are we getting anywhere with getting spots open for these kids? 'Cause
Yeah,
I would
and
imagine,
so-
since you said they're full. You know.
Yeah, so our slots are full at the secondary level. One of the things that we added this year, if you remember, I mentioned to you Care Solace. Many of you have heard that as parents. That actually has been a wonderful addition. I mean, our families are getting the care that they need. It's just that we want to be able to offer it in the school setting so that our children don't have to either do it outside of school or parents don't have to take off of work to take their children. So we're still working. It's not us that's the issue. I will say every therapist, even Care Solace is saying they're just understaffed. Yeah. So we're doing the best that we can, but at least adding Care Solace has helped.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, privilege of the floor. Do we have any speakers this evening? None. All right. Then President's message, just short message. Just want to say congratulations to all of our graduates. We had our graduations on Friday evening for Eisenhower and Saturday morning for West. And Ms. Crosby joined me as well as Ms. Connick at those graduation ceremonies. And it's very enjoyable. I have to say, our schools really put on very nice graduations, and I love how they focus on the students. And I wish them well in their years to come, and hope we can hear back from them how they're doing. Do we follow up with our students? I hope we do. Okay, great. I also want to remind everybody that our next meeting, we are going to have another work session, and that will be our setting our goals. And so basically, we're going to revisit the goals we set last year, see how we're our progress and if we want to make any changes of that. So that's what we can expect at our next meeting. Then we can move on to the administrative team report. We have a superintendent's update.
Yeah, I would echo your sentiments, Janet, regarding our graduations. It certainly is extremely rewarding. I had a gentleman that came up to me afterward, and for some reason he comes to every graduation and asked me if it ever gets old. And I said, well, if it doesn't for you, why would it for me? But it certainly doesn't. It's just, it's the epitome of the celebration of the culmination of the work of those students and the staff. Literally 13 years, when you include kindergarten all the way through. Our elementary schools do an incredible job of laying that foundation for our students, and then getting them in middle school and then eventually through high school. We sat and met with our staff last week, Friday afternoon, and the part that gets harder and harder now that I've been here for 15 years is how do you say thank you after another successful year, and certainly not as tumultuous as maybe some of the most recent years that we've had, but the work doesn't get any easier. To be able to challenge every student, meet every student where they're at, and find ways to have them share their own specific strengths and abilities and skills, and pulling that out of each and every student of ours. And our teachers and staff just seem to have a knack of being able to do that. We have the best of the best staff, I believe, and certainly extremely thankful for all their work. And I did thank them on behalf of the school board and the administration on Friday. Had a nice little get-together Friday afternoon again, and then it was really great to have, again, those moving on ceremonies earlier in the week and then graduations on Friday and Monday. I did also kind of want to share with the board that, and as I've mentioned to the board, there is a New Berlin Education Foundation meeting tomorrow, and they are looking at revamping how they do things and how we may be doing things and working with them moving forward. I plan on giving an update to the board as soon as that board makes a determination on how they are looking to move forward. And they've done an incredible job for us thus far. Most recently, they've established several scholarship funds as well as different mini scholarships to classroom grants, and established a fund with the Waukesha County Foundation as well. But we're looking at possibly doing things differently, and I'll follow up with the board on how that goes and keep you posted. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have the consent agenda, which consists of the notice, the approval of minutes of May 23rd. We have the WASB renewal, the WIAA 2022-23 membership renewals, and an overnight field trip for HOSA. Are there any items that should be pulled out for separate consideration?
I did want to clarify to the board, and I apologize for the late addition, but we were just notified via email. Now, this again was released, I believe, on Friday, and for some reason I hadn't heard about it until late this afternoon. But in your, it should be in your packet, that the WASB announced that they're withdrawing from the National School Board Association. I know that was something that this school board had given serious consideration to, and in fact, if I recall, adopted a resolution related to some of the situations that were going on with the National School Board Association, and it ends up that the WASB is not feeling like they're aligned with things happening at the NSBA for various reasons, and including that they're not necessarily looking out for state associations and the state's best interests. And if I recall correctly, that is now I think Wisconsin is now the 25th state in the U.S. that has no longer has denounced their affiliation with the National School Board Association, and so again, they, not to say that they're kind of closing the door on that chapter. They did mention that the NSBA does have a new executive director that may be looking at doing things differently than the current leadership or the leadership that had been there. But I did want to clarify that that was in your packet. Again, I apologize for the late delay, but we were just made aware of that this afternoon. I did also want to mention that the amount that we are charged is based on an enrollment, student enrollment, and that's what it's based off of. I know Janet had inquired about how they determine their fees, and it's basically on an enrollment fee schedule.
So are there any items that should be pulled out for separate consideration? No. I'll just mention the fee is $9,559, just so that that's publicly known.
And it's actually full-time equivalent enrollment, not student enrollment. So it's based on our staff size.
Okay, so then do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Helmer and a second by Mr. Kurth to approve the consent agenda as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, motion passes. On to our regular agenda. We had the employment services update, but that is not available this evening due to Dr. Jones not being available. And so we're going to move on to the preliminary 2022-2023 budget presentation.
Thank you. So what I'm here to present tonight is our preliminary budget. For those of you who've been in the school district on the board since I started here in 2019, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but my purpose for going through this as deliberately as I do is to make sure that I'm not only presenting a budget, but I'm also educating the board and the public in the different types of budget presentations that we have throughout the fiscal year. So the first slide, the preliminary budget, is a very unique budget. It mainly allows for the district. It does two things. It shows the board that the finance department does have a plan for their budget going forward into the next fiscal year, which starts on the 1st of July. And it also allows for the Board of Education, through their approval, to give permission for us to conduct business on the 1st of July. Our annual meeting is not until September. We actually don't approve our original budget until the end of October, which, yes, that's more than a quarter away from the beginning of our fiscal year. We really don't have all of the details that we need in order to build our budget until late September, between the end of September and the middle of October. So it is a very unique structure that we operate under. And so this budget will differ from the budget that is presented in August in our annual meeting. And there also may be some adjustments between our annual meeting, not in August, in September. There also may be some adjustments from the annual meeting until our original budget in October, as those key pieces of information become known. I would like to go through the budget and assumptions in summary form. At the end of these slides, I am directing you to the additional detail that can be found in the preliminary budget booklet that was included in board docs. Our revenue assumptions this next year, we are assuming that we are going to have a 15% reduction in state aid. State aid generally is factored on three different key components. One of them is enrollment. One of them is our expense of any fund balance. And the third piece is our property valuation. We are a declining enrollment district right now, so that is one area that is not going to be in our favor for state aid. And because we chose to pay off some callable debt in March using fund balance, there was some expenses with fund balance that also does not favor our state aid position. Now, there is a silver lining in this cloud, in that the state will not allow any district in the state of Wisconsin to lose more than 15% of their state aid in any year. And so regardless of how much our enrollment may decline, regardless of how much fund balance we expend, there's a ceiling to how much state aid that we can lose. Also, bear in mind the presentations that I've done the last few years. We have increased in state aid over the past 3 years. There have been some significant increases in state aid, especially the last 2 years. So we are nowhere near the level of state funding that we were in the 2019-2020 school year. We're way ahead of that yet. We are anticipating a decline of approximately 76 students. That's based on a 3-year rolling average. That's not just this year. It's an average of what we're projecting for this year and the last 2 years. We are looking at a 3.18% increase in property taxes. That's a direct result of a loss of state aid. That's not a 3.18% increase in mill rate. That's the actual amount of taxes that are levied to the city. We are looking at significant federal aid increases in the form of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding, and we will be using the flexibility of how we are allowed to claim and when we are allowed to claim those funds to manage our finances over the next 3 fiscal years. The preliminary budget does assume a 3.45 general fund revenue increase. And again, most of that comes from federal dollars. This pie chart essentially shows you visually where our funding comes from. Obviously, you can see the largest share, 70%, comes from local sources, roughly 25% from state sources, and only 3% from federal sources, and that 3% in federal is actually an increase. Assumptions for the expenditures for the general fund, board authorized a 2.91% increase. We were recommended to not have any increase in our health insurance, because our health insurance was performing well, and actually our renewals for fixed costs were very favorable for the district. Purchase services reflects a large reduction in property services. We're moving some projects to Fund 41. There were some software reductions, et cetera. Purchase service reflects an increase mainly from transportation and fuel. Planned technology infrastructure improvements are also being managed. We are prepared for having to carry over the ELA curriculum adoption that was done a few meetings ago. The issue is when our auditors come in, there is a chance that they may look at the timing of that purchase and say, no, you have to move that purchase into the 2023 fiscal year. We're prepared for that. Right now, we have the expense in this fiscal year, but again, that's what we do in the Office of Finance, is we manage these things and we prepare for any of those changes. There is no transfer from the general fund to debt service this year, so you will see some pretty large changes in a few of the accounts. Again, more detail can be found in the preliminary booklet. Again, for those visual folks to look, 50 or 42% of our expenses are in the area of salaries, nearly 17% in benefits. That's so that comprises, 60 or 70% of our budget. Purchase services is rather large as well. Understand purchase services, there are some rather large contracts that fall in purchase services. One of them is our transportation contract, and the other is all of our substitute contracts. Those are very large expenses from year to year. And so that tends to skew our purchase services a little higher. The other expenses in non-capital and other, those are mainly for materials that we purchase for our school. The interesting one is called transfers. The main transfer is from the general fund to our special education fund. Again, I think there's a common misconception with many in the state of Wisconsin that the federal government and the state fund special education costs. And in all honesty, the majority of the funding for special education comes as a transfer from the general fund to support those expenses. So that's where that nearly 10% in fund transfer comes from. Some of the special education, moving on, and again, more detail from this is in the budget booklet. We are not anticipating any reduction in federal support for special education. That may seem a strange statement that we're not expecting a reduction, but it's not uncommon for us to get reductions in some of the federal grants that support special education. We are anticipating a 3.1% increase in state special education aid and revenue for high-cost aid. Now, what you need to understand is the state support for special education is relatively small, so a 3.1% increase is not necessarily a windfall in revenue, but it is definitely something that is worth noting. Another thing, and this is the kudos I want to give to some folks in my staff, the district in the last 3 years has significantly increased the revenue for high-cost aid. There are students that we serve in our school district that are that have special needs that cannot be served in our buildings, or have significant needs that require some additional assistance in our buildings, perhaps a one-on-one aid or some equipment. When we have students who require a significant additional expense, we have the ability to recover some of those dollars. And that was something that was not happening consistently in the district. And we have increased, for example, our high-cost aid. Just this last year, we increased it by $160,000, which again, I think is kudos to my staff for working hard to make sure that we identify all of those and get those things added to our budget revenue. Again, for the visual folks, you'll see almost 62% of our special education funding comes from transfers from the general fund. Assumptions for special education expenditures, the salary increase and the associated benefits that are tied to salaries, and also increases in transportation costs related to contractual increases. Again, it's when we have students that we need to transport, not just from home to school and back home, but if we have students that are going to an alternative placement, it's the district's responsibility to make sure that those students get transported there. And it is expensive to have that transportation. That's why we have the white wheelchair vans and a couple of the additional vans. And we work very hard to keep those costs down, but sometimes we really just have no choice but to, for example, contract with Durham to help us with that transportation. Nearly 65% and 20% in salaries and benefits. Otherwise, you look at purchase services, which is equipment essentially and materials. to support special education. We also want to talk just a little bit about fund balance. You'll note in the budget booklet at the end of the 21-22 school year, it was estimated that we had a fund balance of $14,650,000. We are anticipating at the end of this year that fund balance will be reduced to $13,850,000. Once we get to the end of June and we can close out all of our books, it is likely that the fund balance for the end of this year will change. I fully anticipate that. What I'm reporting to you right now is what we know. I'm a little reluctant to make too wild of guesses as to what's going to happen. I'd rather give you solid information, and that will be coming early in the next fiscal year. The reason for fund balance is that it is maintained for unexpected or emergency expenses, credit rating, minimize the need for cash flow borrowing, which we have not had to do since the 1920 school year. What you also need to understand about fund balance is it's not a rainy day fund. We don't just have $13 million sitting in an account that just kind of hangs out there. That fund balance measurement is a one-day snapshot. So when we get done with our audit and they calculate all of the revenues and expenses and changes in our assets, they will calculate a fund balance that is for the 30th of June in 2022. That fund balance will most likely change by I would say for sure by the 10th of July, because we'll be paying bills, payrolls will be calculated and distributed. So understand that is not just a rainy day fund that sits there aside of everything else. These are active dollars that the district uses to manage its cash flow. Reminder, we don't get a significant amount of revenue until the middle of January. So we are essentially managing half of our fiscal year without any significant revenue from the state or from the local property taxes. So that's what we use our fund balance for. A graphical representation of what's happened with our fund balance over the years. I know that the fund balance buildup from 2011 to 2013 was planned, as well as the fund balance spend down from 2014 to 2017. Beginning in 2018, we then had another gradual buildup of fund balance, which again rose to approximately the same level as the previous high in 2021. And again, we had planned to do some fund balance spend down to support capital maintenance in the district from now until the time period when our capital or when our Fund 38 debt is paid off. And for example, this year we used our fund balance to pay off a significant amount of that debt. Did want to take a little time to talk about some of the ESSER reimbursements that the district is planning. We have claimed all of the, let's just call them ESSER 1, even though they had different names. We are on to the ESSER 2 allocation. The ESSER 2 allocation was approximately $1.2 million. And the district is prepared to claim all of the dollars that you see here. The budget has been submitted to the state. It is approved. And as soon as we feel that it is the right time to put those dollars in our revenue, we are ready to submit that claim. There are 4 key areas that we are spending our ESSER dollars on. And I did give you some examples. It's not everything, but these are examples of what would fall under those categories. I also included the dollar amounts that we have budgeted under each of those categories. Those 4 categories are preparedness and response to COVID-19, addressing long and short-term school closure, educational technology, and any indirect costs. And I think the toughest one to describe is the indirect cost. And those are just their costs that are associated with managing a grant like this. There are payroll, supplies, utilities that are connected in with all of these that just don't fall into an easy category. And so the DPI creates a category called indirect costs. I also want to touch just a bit on some of the non-education funds. The two education funds that we have are Fund 10 and Fund 27. That's our general education fund and our special education fund. Here are a few of our non-education funds. Fund 30, and there's just a brief description of what they're used for and some of the activity that we've had in those funds. Fund 38 is our non-referendum debt fund. There are two ways that a district can take out or issue debt. One of them is through a referendum that goes on an election ballot, or another process is the Board of Education can go through a series of meetings with hearings and whatnot, and they can issue debt if the public does not essentially come up with a petition to stop that. The difference is Fund 38 debt actually is inside of the revenue limit. So what Fund 38 does is it reduces the amount that the district has to spend in its general education fund. The school district of New Berlin is unique in the state in that all of our debt lies in this particular fund. But I do think that it was done for very specific reasons in the district, and believe it or not, we are actually managing this. Fund 50 is our food service fund. These are funds that are segregated from all other funds in the budget to be used only for food service related expenses. We, like many school districts in the state, have accumulated some significant fund balance over the last 2 years when all of the approved meals were fully reimbursed by the federal government. We do know that we will be asked by the Department of Public Instruction to come up with a spend down plan. And I've been working with Cindy Jensen, our food service director, to make those plans on how we're going to use those additional funds. Fund 80 is our community service fund, which we use to support programming to the community. Things like our Performing Arts Center and the rental process for different facilities is run through this fund. And finally, a new fund that we began using just this last year, the Capital Expansion Fund, Fund 41. We levy dollars into this fund for the support of capital improvements throughout the district. The biggest benefit to this fund is these funds are sheltered from any other activity in the district. So when the board commits that they want to use money to perform capital improvements and we put it in this fund, we can't just decide in another year or two, oh, we want to take some money out of there and buy textbooks. We are showing the community that we are committed to maintaining our district facilities through the use of this fund. It also has some benefits for mitigating any state aid loss that a district like New Berlin, which is considered property rich, has throughout the funding formula. And everybody's interested in the estimated tax levy and the impact. For the fiscal 23, we estimate the property tax levy to be $44,791,000. Again, a 3.18 increase from last year due to the 15% decrease in state aid. We are anticipating, I am estimating an increase in property value of 2.51%, which is an 10-year rolling average of the increase in property value in the city. This would result in a 5 cent per thousand increase in the tax levy. That would be about an $11.70 increase to an individual's property taxes on a home valued at $250,000. Depending upon how enrollment lands for this, and also depending upon the valuation of property in the city of New Berlin, this number, I will say, will certainly be a little bit different in the next budgets that you see. We do not have, the school district does not have anything to do with the estimates in the property value in the city of New Berlin. That is done by the Department of Revenue. They do all of those calculations and they just send me a number. They will also calculate computer aid and some other general aid as well. But again, we have nothing to do with that number. This graph, and I apologize for the small print, but we are looking at a number of years of equalized value and tax levy and the rate of our tax levy. And as you can see, the tax levy, the tax levy per $1,000 of value has been dropping consistently since the 2013-14 school year. And it would take, again, it's going to take some time for the school district to even come close to, where the tax levy was, even in, 10 years ago, 20 or 5 years ago in 1819. I really like these two graphs because it shows what has happened to the property value, and this is property value in millions, and it's the 12-year property tax levy history. So you can see exactly what's happened. While the value of personal property in the city of New Berlin has gone up significantly since the 2011-2012 school year, where it was a little under $45 billion, to this year where it's estimated to be nearing $60 billion, with a property tax levy that started just a little under $11 per thousand, and now we are estimating just a little over $7 a thousand. That is a pretty phenomenal, feat for a school district in the state, where so many school districts that are passing referenda that are either for operating or passing referenda for big construction projects, and their tax levies are going up. Some in the North Shore, they've gone up over $3 a thousand just in 1 year, and we have our property tax levy that's gone from nearly from a little over $11 a thousand to under $8 a thousand. Also, a couple of slides on our budget forecast, because I think it's very important to discuss what's going on with our budget forecast this next year. Forecasting, we are in the last year of a biennial budget, which means that forecasting beyond the fiscal 23 school year is going to be very difficult, because we don't know what support is going to be in the state budget for K-12 public education. We can only make estimates on that. Now, one of the things that happened in the last biennial budget that is going to have a significant impact is there was no inflationary increase to the per pupil amount, whether it is in revenue limit or categorical aid, in the last biennial budget. The legislature and the governor felt that the influx of federal dollars was enough for the public school, K-12 public, to be able to manage the 2 years of the biennial budget. I don't say that that's a a good thing or a bad thing. What it is going to create, however, is for the next biennial budget, there is going to be a funding gap that is going to have to be filled somehow. That's either, you know, right now it's estimated that it could be between $400 and $550 a student in districts like New Berlin. And so it's going to be up to us to position the district to be able to handle what we are given in the next biennial budget. And what I want you to know is we are prepared for that. If the fiscal deficit is not filled, fiscal years 26 to 27 will become even more interesting to try to predict. But again, we are, as a district, prepared for what our financial future is. It's a very unique situation to be in, where there are so many districts that are scrambling, quite honestly, that are fearful of what's coming in the future. And we've been able to put ourselves in a great position to be able to manage this in the future. Currently, what we are looking at for a budget forecast this year, obviously you see a huge deficit, and that's because we paid off a large amount of debt. Next year, we are looking at approximately $800,000, and that's related to, and again, here I'm saying we've got a great chance of having to move the ELA curriculum expense into the next fiscal year. So I'm just planning for that in fund balance wise. But then we are looking at 2 years, fiscal 24 and fiscal 25, where I believe that the district is positioned to be able to manage using using the federal funds that are going to backfill what we are receiving for revenue from the state. Again, that's flexibility that we have been given in those funds. We're not doing anything different than any other school district is doing. It's we're using the situation that we have to benefit us. And then I'm looking at fiscal 26 and fiscal 27. The $1 million in fund balance expenditure there is directly related to the facilities plan that was discussed last year in the spring. Now, what I'll also say is, remember what I just said. As we move forward in the next biennial budget, which would be the 24-25 school year, the district is prepared to manage the revenues that are given to them through the state biennial budget. We are prepared for that. And then in fiscal 26 and 27, we may need to make some financial adjustments, but again, we're quite a ways away from that. And I do feel confident that we are in a good place to be able to manage what we have for revenues in the future.
So that's our presentation on the budget. For tonight, we are not seeking approval of anything. So we'd like to take a couple meetings for us to be able to present the information, wait a couple weeks before the board makes a determination on approval. That will give us enough time to be able to move forward as needed with the preliminary budget. We'll be happy to answer some questions now, but certainly if you do have any questions between now and the next board meeting, please direct them to myself, and we will work through those questions and either provide them to you in an update and or provide them to you at the next meeting that we can share with not only all of you, but the public as well. One of the things that I did want to clarify is we were asked by the board to make sure that we included the ESSER funds and how we were going to be recording those. That's something that both Mitch and Janet asked us to clarify in these meetings. We are doing that now and we'll continue to do that. Again, there have been questions about whether we've been meeting the requirements as set forth by the state, and we have. Our budgets have been approved, and it's just a matter of us actually moving those requisitions then forward. But again, anything that you may need between now and then, please let us know. But again, we're happy to answer questions now as needed.
I do have a question. The state aid reduction by 15%, one of the factors is declining enrollment. Do we have an understanding as to why we're declining and what that looks like from year over year?
Yeah, so what's made it difficult for all school districts is the situation that we've had to deal with over the course of the last couple of years, actually the last 3 years. We actually did an enrollment projection. We got an enrollment projection report, and we were actually expected to maintain stability within the next, what would have been at the time, the next 5 years, and I think we're about 3 or 4 years into that prediction. Well, again, that was all kind of thrown to the wind with the disruption to all of public education. We are looking, some of the things are that there's a lot of mobility in public education, more than there was prior to the disruption that occurred in all school districts. In fact, most recently I read that there are like hundreds of thousands of students that are no longer on the docket in public education because of the fact that, now again I'm speaking in general terms, but the fact that people learn to adjust not to have to deal with public school as in the traditional setting, and they wanted that flexibility that, for example, virtual learning provided. But some of the factors for us include lack of affordable housing for younger families, quite honestly, compared to Muskego that has subdivisions going up all over the place, it seems. You know, and again, it just seems they spend money and spend money and spend money over there. But, you know, we certainly don't have, you know, some of the newer homes are, you know, starting at, you know, over $500,000, you know, and that's kind of not typical.
I guess my question is, if a family decides to leave our school district, are we as a district having exit interviews, or what are we doing with those families?
We certainly follow up. You know, for example, we have followed up over the course of the last couple of years. In fact, students that were moved virtual, certainly we made sure that all of them came back and then some. We did lose some students to virtual learning through open enrollment. We've also self-selected to have students withdraw based on individual contracts with families and agreements with families based on student behaviors and so on. As far as doing exit interviews with every single family, quite honestly, I'm not sure that that would be feasible, but certainly something that we would consider doing. Again, I think on the other side of it, though, you know, if a family is moving out, it's also part of just the general housing availability that people are moving out, but not necessarily families moving in with kids. And based on my conversations with several real estate agents, in some cases, the bigger the house, it doesn't necessarily mean more kids, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. You would think somebody that's buying a 5,000 square foot home would have 10 kids to kind of fill that house, but in fact, it's quite the opposite, which I find interesting.
Can I ask a point of clarity on this? It
Sure.
says 76 students FTE, or declining enrollment, 76 students FTE. Do we have a breakdown of what percentage are enrolling out or open enrolling versus, did we have 50 of these kids graduate and we only do we have 500 kids graduate?
Yes.
And 300 kids come in, or how does that break down? Because there's nothing we can do about that.
Correct, and we can bring that to you. Like, for example, Janet was at both graduations, and Eisenhower had a noticeably very small class compared to New Berlin West, which was substantially bigger. And then the kindergarten classes that are backfeeding that are either smaller or about the same. But Patrick, can you respond?
Yeah, it would be an erroneous assumption that our enrollment decline is related to people that are leaving the district. unless you consider graduating and leaving the district as one of those.
Which is kind of Mitch's point.
Right. Right now, we've had, when I first got here, we were kind of on the tail end of some generally smaller high school graduating classes compared to our incoming kindergarten classes. Now, these last couple of years, we've had much larger graduating classes and incoming kindergarten classes of right in the 300, 320 student area. So when you graduate 400 plus seniors, you have 320 incoming kindergartners. It's not that the district is not doing something and losing students. We just don't have the students that are living in our enrollment area.
No, I understand what you're saying. I guess I would like to see a breakdown of how many students we're losing by staying in New Berlin, but choosing to open and enroll to a different school, or choosing to go private, choosing to go homeschool, is where my concern is.
Did provide that information, I believe, to the board last year when we got to the beginning of the school year, and that's really when we're going to find that information out, because students can disenroll essentially all through the summer. Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, even right up to the beginning of the school year, where we're still getting information that, you know, kids are not returning, they're moving to another school district. And so typically that information is more accurate in September.
Are there any more questions?
I have a question. So one thing that comes up every year is our tax levy rate. Are we levying to the max still?
We are levying to the limit, our legal limit.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so
then-
it's assumed that this is the maximum
Yeah.
that we're allowed to levy. Now, the board can do what it would like, but we're showing you kind of the maximum. And again, quite honestly, and I'm not sure that Patrick particularly pointed this out, he referenced it, but Patrick uses extremely conservative numbers on the front end as it relates to property values and assumptions. And as happened last year, between the preliminary budget and the budget that was actually approved by the board, that levy rate decreased, and in fact, tax dollars decreased per $250,000 home. So we're basically giving you like the worst case scenario of what to expect. We've got some things to kind of tidy up between now and October, and our hope is to see that number go down even further between now and then. But again, we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver that at this point.
I just have one question on the ESSER funds. My question is, have we received any aid for ESSER 1 yet?
Yeah, that's all been, essentially that was the CARES Act money.
Yeah.
And we received that at the beginning of the 21-22 school year, and those dollars have all been expended. That was approximately, I think, the district share of it was like $65,000. We got $91,000 overall, but we had to share some of that with the parochial schools.
Okay.
ESSER 2 just became available to us during this school year. And like I said, we've got our budgets in and can determine when we are going to claim that, those dollars. And again, if we're spending fund balance, and if I claim all of the ESSER dollars and we're still spending fund balance, we're going to lose state aid.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the 15% hold harmless is there, whether we spend, this much fund balance or this much fund balance. So my financial brain says, let's make sure that we're using and claiming the ESSER dollars in a way that's going to benefit the district the most.
Yes.
And so that's where we need to see how things are ending in this fiscal year, and then we can go ahead and claim those. What I'll also say about ESSER is the largest pot of ESSER money is ESSER 3. Right now, there's only $770,000 of that available in WISE grants for us to claim. There are two other pots of ESSER $3. One of them is the EBIS, or Evidence-Based Improvement Strategies dollars. That's already been approved, but it hasn't been put into WISE grants where we can actually start to claim those dollars or budget those dollars. And then there's another 1.2 roughly additional dollars for in-person learning. They don't anticipate that that's going to be available for us to start putting a budget together for it until late August at the earliest.
Okay, thank you.
So does our budget not have ESSER 3 built in here for FY 23 and 4 then, I'm assuming?
For the next fiscal year, we do not have ESSER $3 in there right now. We are going to manage, what of ESSER 3 we put in there based on how, what dollars have to be shifted around.
Because some of that will be spent in that year, and some of that will be recovering expenses we've had in previous years.
Correct.
Right?
All of the ESSER funds, we're allowed to claim expenses going all the way back to March of 2020.
Yep.
And ESSER $3 don't have to be claimed until September 30th of 2024.
Okay, so we have an upside to this budget with ESSER 3 coming in here. And then is ESSER 2 in 2023?
Yes.
Did I miss it? Okay, so that's already factored in here, that's 600,000, okay.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd note would be the last couple of slides where in the forecast, we are, if we're looking out to the years, fiscal year 25, fiscal year 26 and beyond, that is where we have factored in the anticipated reimbursements for ESSER 3. Is that right, Patrick?
Right, the ESSER fiscal year 25 is the last year that we will be able to claim any ESSER $3. So we have to have that all claimed by September of 2024.
So for the current budget, ESSER 1's already been expended. ESSER 2 is factored in. ESSER 3 is not for the current budget, but it is factored into the
It's in 24, 25.
forecast.
It's in the forecast.
Correct.
One more question. So the tax levy is around 44.8 million. Is that split between general fund and Fund 41?
No, that is just the general fund. Excuse me. I'm sorry, you are correct. All of the tax levy, that would be general fund, Fund 41, our debt service fund, and our community service fund. There's property. If you go into the booklet, you'll see there's a line for, it's called property tax chargebacks. So we have a much higher property tax chargeback this year, a little over $13,000. So all of those factors go into what our tax levy is.
And when we have the annual meeting, do we have to have a separate motion for Fund 41?
That's correct. That's the way Fund 41 works. You levy directly into that, and it's kind of one. It's not necessarily a separate motion, but when you make the motion for all of the different components of the tax levy, you have to put in there that it's Fund 41.
How much are we putting in there next year?
This next year, we're going to put a minimum of roughly 1.5 million, which is the principal and interest savings for this next fiscal year based on the debt that we prepaid this last March.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I just have a couple questions.
Okay.
Patrick, and if you don't have these answers, I'd be happy to hear back from you, so not to put you on the spot. Regarding first, purchase services, which of the component of purchase services is transportation, right? How much of that, I was going through the booklet in particular to try to figure out what the difference, and I was comparing the preliminary 22-23 budget to the final 21-22 budget to try to figure out, and I couldn't figure it out, what the difference is in the transportation costs between those 2 fiscal years. Because I know that there is an uptick with fuel, but prior to that, we made a pretty significant change in our tiered busing system to try to save some money, and I'm trying to figure out what the savings actually is. So
The transportation savings, we saved approximately $300,000 in moving to a 3-tiered system.
Okay.
But again, purchase service, those are 2 of the largest components of it,
Right.
but it's not all of it.
Right.
And so, for example, when we have a large technology project where we hire a company to come in and replace access points. That's a purchase service. What a purchase service is we're paying somebody to come in and do work instead of the school district doing it on its own. And so there are other large expenses in there.
Sure.
But
But what I'm trying to nail down is what's the difference in busing specifically between these 2 fiscal years and our expenses? Because I'm trying to figure out whether the way that we put parents out with the change, whether that's worth, is the juice worth the squeeze, is what I'm trying to figure out. So if we made that big change, you said we saved $300,000 that at the first time that we switched. I also want to know about where we are with bus ridership, because I know that was down. Is that still down? And where were we before we made this switch in terms of bus ridership? Where are we now? And I'm trying to figure out if, in fact, these changes are in the best interest of our families. So that's what I'm trying to assess.
Sure, shoot that to
We will
Joe in
get
an email.
the, we will get that information to
That'd be
you in the
great.
full board.
I'll articulate it for you in an email.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say that I think has been priceless, quite honestly, is when we moved to a 3-tier system, we needed less bus drivers. And so while other school districts are actually experiencing bus driver shortages that are of significance to the fact where they're actually having to triple up and quadruple up routes that were unplanned.
Sure.
Because of the lack of drivers, we didn't experience that because there are less drivers needed to run those routes. And so, again, I won't be able to put a price tag on that.
Sure.
But certainly the disruption that's caused to neighboring school districts where they actually can't even shuttle kids to local events because they don't have enough drivers to send kids to a sporting event, or they have to double or triple up different, like the softball team with the golf team with all these different teams that are showing up to events later, having to reschedule. Again, that's something I can't put a price on, but certainly we'll address the questions that you mentioned, and certainly we do believe that it has been a positive financial impact to the budget. And quite honestly, I'm not sure that I recall the last time I received a complaint or concern related to that change that we made a couple years ago.
Sure. And I appreciate the fact that, in this employment environment, everybody's struggling to get people. So I can see that would be an upside where we have less need of bus drivers. So that's important to make a note of. I'd still like to know what the numbers are on the savings, because the savings is predicted to be really significant, and I don't know if it's met that bar. So I wanna just get some numbers on that is all. The second question that I had.
I'm sorry, when you send your email, can you please include a quantification of the really significant so that I can compare that?
Well, I think that you've got the numbers, Patrick, because I think that when we talked about making this change, you gave us numbers on that we were going to save, right? That was discussed. So I think you've got those numbers when the change was made. So that's what I'm wondering about. I'm just wondering how it all shakes out, because over time, we don't know when we make these changes, how's it going to shake out? So now I'm asking, how's it shaking out? So that's
Did it reach its goal of $350,000? Did we
in every successive year that we're predicted to have savings? That's what we were
right.
That's what we were told.
We want to check to see that we actually made those savings.
Right. That's what I'm checking. So that's the first thing. The second question I had was when you were talking about, Patrick, earlier, you were talking about the fact that we were able to get about $160,000 identified by staff members to sort of, for lack of a better word, you didn't use this word, I'm using this word, to sort of recapture some special ed expenses. What kind of expenses, and this is just for my own edification, what sort of expenses are sort of recapturable like that?
Those can be transportation expenses. They
Okay.
can be personnel expenses if a student requires an expensive piece of equipment for transferring or whatnot. It can be it can be staffing, purchase services, transportation, or it could be an alternative placement.
Okay, so those are all, so has that always been the case that these resources were available and we just weren't applying for them, or we didn't know they were available, or what was happening?
No, I mean, I just, we are making sure that we are chasing every dollar that we possibly can with a fine-tooth comb. And it's not to say that it wasn't happening. It is to say that we can assure you that we are finding every possible dollar that's available to us based on the things that have changed at the state level.
And those reimbursements are coming from the state or federal resources?
Those are coming from state reimbursements.
State resources?
Mhm.
Okay. And then I looked back at the total expenses that were budgeted for the 21-22 fiscal year at the September meeting that budget that we passed at that meeting. The total expenses that we budgeted were $56,801,059. The expense total on this presentation, the actual number that it looks like it's, where we're landing, is $61,157,325. So that's what's the difference?
We had to record the transfer from the general fund to pay the debt in
The
Fund
$4 million.
38 as a expense.
So that's where it lands, and that makes up for the 4 million, and then there's a little 1.5 or 2 million more that were
And
over.
remember, we also had some additional expenses because of
Supply chain issues.
issues
That were carried over.
we transferred, so.
That we just shifted.
Correct.
I remember talking about that too. Okay, that helps me understand that. And then I think those are all my questions. Oh, one last question on the enrollment. The 76 decrease in enrollment, that was for this last school year, right? That we're closing out, or is that what we predict for next year?
That's what we're predicting for the 3-year rolling average for this next year.
Got it.
Understand, we did have 1 year, that was I believe the first year post-COVID, where we had a significant drop in enrollment. It was over 100, like 116.
Yeah.
So that number is going to, it's going to haunt us for 3 years.
Sure.
Until that number falls off, because it's a 3-year average.
Okay. And then one last question. To your point of, actually to Renee's point about declining enrollment, which I've been asking about for a long time. Oh, and the open enrollment numbers, I'd like to know what the revenue, because I can't figure it out from the budget, what we're getting from open enrollment numbers, because I think that's just lumped in with the state.
Correct. And I think that's a great conversation for the annual meeting, where this is a budget where we're really needing to get to July 1st so that we can conduct business. And then we'll have all of those numbers when we get to September and we have our annual meeting.
Okay, so you'll be able to parse out what the open enrollment revenue is.
Correct.
Okay, and you don't want to do that before then?
I can look at what we're anticipating for open enrollment this year, but it's also a calculation. It's not, we can tell you what the kids are.
Yeah.
But if those kids were open enrolled for a portion of a year or whatnot.
That affects what the revenue
That impacts what their revenue is.
Sure. Okay, and then is there any way to, I assume we have census data in New Berlin about like how many kids we have living within the school district boundaries, right? So if we have a way to figure out how many kids live within the school district boundaries, then I would assume we'd be able to do some simple math to determine well, this is how many kids live here, and then this is how many kids we have enrolled in our district. And then we can figure out how many kids are not enrolled in New Berlin schools. And then we can know, to Renee's point, if we have a problem with people just choosing not to enroll in New Berlin schools who live in New Berlin. So is that census data readily available somewhere for?
I think we can, we look at all the that's a very simplified approach. It's much
Sure.
more complex than
Sure.
that.
Oh, of course it is, because people make choices based on a lot of different factors as far as not enrolling. But I think that it's important,
Of course.
you know,
We
to
do
figure
too.
out what are the numbers.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay, so you can figure that out and get me some.
We will get more information to the board.
That'd be great.
Okay, we got
The great part about it is we've got a great budget that we presented, and taxes are minimally going to be staying right where they're at, and we continue to produce an incredible product on behalf of the taxpayers and parents of this community.
Which is why we should have more open enrollment so we can sell that product.
We need space.
Off topic.
Yes. Okay, anyways.
I apologize.
We'll wrap this up. I do have one question. ESSER 3 claims. So these numbers that you have here on that particular slide are the recommended way you want those spent, and will be possibly presented to us then to vote on come September.
Yeah, those are the budgets that we've actually provided to DPI of what those expenditures would be, what we would be submitting reimbursement for. So that's already taken place. So that's assumed within the budget, at least the ESSER 2 part of it.
Okay. And then that's something that we, though, still have to vote on No.
No.
Okay, it's just, we'll be voting on it by way of the budget, though.
Correct.
Okay. All right, I just wanted that clarification. All right, so we're going to wrap that up now and move on to our next item, which is action items discussed in closed section. We have one motion.
I move to approve the employment services report as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Kurth, a second by Mr. Helmer to approve as presented. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? Motion passes. Then we have future meetings and dates. Board meetings are generally held the second and fourth Mondays beginning at 7 p.m. in the Eisenhower Commons unless noted otherwise. So we have June 27th is our next meeting. We'll have that work session beforehand. And then we have a meeting July 25th. Other important events and dates we mentioned already. We're going to be having that annual meeting. It is set for September 26th. So that's the annual meeting and budget hearing. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Kurth and a second by Mr. Helmer to adjourn. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed? This meeting, motion passes. This meeting is adjourned.